Those structuring efforts do bear fruits, which we see now in the first quarter. Of course, they're also saying that they're expecting default rates to go up. They have increased their loan loss provision to 500 million euro, which is, I guess, fourfold the level of the first quarter of last year. But that's not a wonder if you look at the economic outlook here in Germany, but also elsewhere in the world. So it is a positive surprise. The shares are up by, I don't know, currently I don't see them, but the indication was 8%. So bottom line, a positive surprise. Back to you.
Annette, thank you very much for that report. Really interesting to see them relaxing those capital targets. And I know one of the things you pointed out, the question moving forward and whether investors can be comfortable with that, is what happens to the creditworthiness of those clients that they're extending more support to during this crisis. Well, sticking with Germany, but pushing on, German Economy Minister Peter Olmeyer has said the government wants to ensure that, quote, large and important companies such as Lufthansa remain competitive after the crisis. The government has not yet made a decision on the struggling airlines aid package. And here you've got Lufthansa shares reacting very strongly this morning, up a nearly 8%. Adidas also in focus this morning for investors. The company has warned that business is at a near standstill. The sportswear giant posted a 19% fall in first quarter sales and predicts a 40% drop for the second quarter. Online sales have risen, but Adidas says around 70% of its shops remain shut. And it is unclear when they will reopen. And Adidas shares are underperforming the broader market this morning, down nearly 3%. Speaking to Cnbc earlier, Adidas CEO Kasper Rorsted said the company was looking at financial vehicles to raise money in the short term, but its goal ultimately is to regain organic growth.
At this stage, we have about 5 billion of liquidity. Part of it, what we had already on the balance sheet, and then we had a state bank loan that was, I would say, spearheaded by UniCredit. Right now, we're of course looking upon other financial vehicles, but the most important part is to bring down the loans and and the debt position we have is really getting in to grow organically again, and that's going to take a while. You saw the guidance for the second quarter. So right now, that's not our primary concern. Our primary concern was having a strong balance sheet that can take us through a crisis over a longer period of time, and that is what we have now done.
Kasper Rorsted there. Bayer has posted a 10% jump in first quarter EBITDA after the pandemic caused an uptick in demand, although the German drug giant says it's unclear if it will be able to maintain the bounce. The group, which also makes pesticides, said the looming downturn and squeeze on liquidity has forced it to take a tougher stance on its glyphosate lawsuit claims in the United States. We're very pleased to have Werner Baumann with us, the CEO of Bayer. Good to have you on the program. Can I just get some clarity on exactly what that means? I understand the company is concerned about the impact of the ongoing lawsuit, but how is your position actually going to change as a consequence of COVID-19?
Well, good morning. First of all, thanks for having me. And we have had a great first quarter with strong sales growth, 6%, earnings up by 10%, as you mentioned. And then on top of that, core earnings also increased by about 10%. So overall, very, very good. We are very happy about the quarter. Tremendous efforts by our people, making everything possible that under normal circumstances you would not see being possible. And that has allowed us to actually get to that strong quarter. Of course, also positively impacted by the COVID effects, certainly on our consumer health business, but also some increased buying in the other divisions. Now, for the remainder of the year, we just have to wait for a few more months until we see the lay of the land on how we re-emerge out of the crisis. We are very, very prepared and working diligently through our restart activities, but to give guidance is simply too early now.
Can I just rephrase the question then? Obviously, there's been an increase in the number of plaintiffs, 48,000 in February. That's now over 52,000 plaintiffs. In this earnings statement, you talk about having to get stricter with these claimants for liquidity reasons. I'm just asking, can you give us any more clarity as to what that means? Does that mean that you are going to be more aggressive in legal terms in trying to stop the level of claims rising?
Well, we stand behind the safety of glyphosate, and that has been confirmed over and over again by all virtually all regulatory agencies around the world. The number of cases per se doesn't say anything about the quality or the justification of these cases. We are constructively engaged in settlement and mediation discussions under the leadership of Ken Feinberg. But you ask for your understanding that since those conversations are confidential, I cannot shed more light on the content of these discussions. The only thing I can say is that, of course, the pandemic has slowed down things. The situation has become, I think, more difficult, looking at the fact that meetings cannot take place as they were taking place before. We see significant tightening in the markets, and the status is the reflection of those circumstances.
Werner, can I move this on from that specific conversation to look at global farming generally? And I'm specifically not talking about China in particular here. I'm talking about industrial farming globally. There are those of us who believe there is something very badly wrong, and this touches on three areas of your business. One, human health, two, animal health, and three, crop science. There are those of us who believe there's something very, very badly wrong with the food chain at the moment, and it needs to be addressed. I would suggest that Bayer are in a unique position to help solve that issue. A, do you believe there is a problem with industrial farming? And B, what's the solution? And I suppose we can add into that the fact that there are grave concerns about its effects on climate change as well.
Well, I'm sorry I didn't get your question entirely. The transmission is fairly bad, but I guess the main points are that we have, I think, very appropriately adjusted our portfolio towards health and nutrition. We see the resilience of our portfolio during the first quarter in line with our vision, health for all, hunger for none. The quality of the portfolio, the strategic direction we are taking proves to be the right one for our business and, quite frankly, also for all of our stakeholders.
Let me try and get the question again. Do you think there is a problem with the food chain globally? And I'm not specifically talking about China, I'm talking about globally, where animal health and human health are at risk, and potentially we'll see more pandemics down the line because of problems in industrial farming.
Well, the food chain is certainly affected, as we see by the commodity prices, which have come down, which may also impact our business going forward. The situation, again, is highly volatile. We continue to see, probably also through 2020 and into 2021, the impacts of the African swine disease with lower demands in China. And of course, the consumption pattern is changing due to the fact that restaurants and hospitality sector is down and actually not consuming anything right now. And that has an effect on, number one, our crop business in all likelihood going forward. Number two, the animal health business, even though animal health posted a very, very strong first quarter as discontinued business. And then, of course, we see people looking really after their health, and that is the positive effect in quarter one, with a 14% growth of our consumer health business, so very, very strong start into the year. Still, I can only repeat what I said, to look forward into 2020 and give guidance way too early right now.
Can I ask you a little bit about that consumer health business? Because looking through the portfolio, I can see that maybe aspirin, Berocca, a couple of those products might be sought, but it's hard to see where the extra benefit would be around COVID-19. So just talk me through the individual products that you're seeing the extra demand for, and also around a second wave of infections, whether you might see more stockpiling by consumers because of those fears.
Well, we are asking all of our consumers and customers to not stockpile, but buy for their demand, and for their consumption. We have a very resilient supply chain. We've worked very, very hard to keep our production and supply chain and entire value chain up and running throughout the first quarter. Some of it pays back big dividends right now because we are able to respond to a fairly volatile demand, and we expect to be able to do so also going forward. well, and that means depending on how the infection patterns move, we will see further volatility. We are prepared to dealing with it, and let's see what the remainder of the year brings. There are going to be positives and negatives. We stand ready to serve our consumers, our farmers, and our patients around the world. That's what we are in business for, and that's what our people do day in, day out.
Sir, I want to just quickly ask you about hydroxychloroquine. I know Bayer was quick out the gate to donate to the efforts to understand whether this could be an effective treatment against COVID-19. Just weigh in for us what your thoughts are around this.
Well, we have donated medicines, be it Resurgence, be it over-the-counter medicines, in order to support communities and people who are in dire need of those medicines. I have to say, though, that with Resurgence, there are some indications that it may help to actually smoothen the progression of the disease, but it has to be taken under doctor supervisions. On top of that, there are no clinical study results as of yet. We expect them to come in the next weeks, and then we'll see how effective Resurgence really is. What we have said is that we will go out of our way to make the volumes we can make, even with restarting production in Europe. We will donate all of that because that's part of the genetic footprint of the company that we want to help. There's huge humanitarian need, and we still have to wait for the positive, hopefully positive results of Resurgence should they come out over the next weeks to come.
Werner, great to have that important update from you. Thank you so much for being with us. Werner Baumann, the CEO of Bayer. Moving on, survival at stake. Find out why the CEO of Airbus is issuing a harsh warning to staff. We'll have that when we come back.
Now get greedy whenever you want. Subscribe to the American Greed Podcast.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on Tunein, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Whenever you're unsure of what to play next, head to the homepage and discover something new. There you'll see custom recommendations based on your listening habits, along with new episodes of shows you've enjoyed in the past. Uncover your next audio obsession on the homepage. In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history. Search Classic Game Replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime. It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on TuneIn. Behind the highlight reels, championship rings, and colossal paychecks, there are sports stories that fuel, deepen, and even challenge our love for the game. For true tales of underdogs, anti-heroes, and game-changing innovators, search sports documentaries on the TuneIn app.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone,
Come explore TuneIn's Classic Game Replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There's going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
Search Classic Game Replays to listen for free.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Get your daily dose of NFL shop talk with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Start your morning off right with Around the NFL.
Injured, depleted roster into the
store.
Welcome back to Squawk Box. Volkswagen has restarted production and shares are up about 3.4%. Production at its flagship Wolfsburg factory, the world's biggest car maker, said output at the site will initially be limited to between 10 to 15% as workers adapt to new coronavirus safety measures. VW plans to reopen other plants across the world this week, including factories in Spain, Russia, and South Africa. And as I mentioned, shares are trading firmly this morning on the back of this news, up more than 3%. Air France KLM is set to receive 7 billion euros from the French government. Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said the package was needed to save the French airline amid an unprecedented industry crisis, but warned that the money would come with strings attached. And shares there are reacting well to that news. A bit of relief for investors, up about 5%. The CEO of Airbus has warned the group's survival is at stake. In an employee memo seen by Reuters, Guillaume Fauré said the company was, quote, bleeding cash at an unprecedented speed. Pretty damning sentence there from the CEO. Airbus shares under a little bit of pressure this morning, but still holding up relatively well considering how dramatic that sentiment is. Let's get out to Charlotte, who joins us more now on this story. Charlotte, it's interesting to hear from Airbus, one of the key manufacturers, to say the least, behind the airline sector, with this kind of news that they're bleeding cash. When we look at the airlines like Air France KLM this morning securing more help for the business, what does the path forward look like for Airbus, who's so critical to the airline industry?
Well, this news on Air France would be good news for Airbus, and that's what they've been saying the past few weeks, that they are supporting state help for airlines. Of course, their main customers, Airbus and like Boeing, their competitor, are in the second life of the wave of this crisis, really, with airlines not flying any planes, most of their planes completely grounded. Of course, airlines are desperate to hold on to their cash and therefore delaying, if not cancelling, some of their plane orders. And we've seen some plane cancellations already at Airbus, which is unusual because penalties are quite high, but some airlines have already gone through this. So here this warning from Airbus saying that they're bleeding cash at this unprecedented speed, and that the very existence of the company could be at risk, and that they need to act urgently to reduce the cash out. So this comes after a decade of growth there for Airbus, but now this new scenario, this new demand, they have to adapt. They adapted production. For example, they've already cut production by about a third. They have already, of course, withdrawn their 2020 dividend and scrapped dividend. And here, they have also furloughed some of their workers. Now, the question is whether state aid would be needed at Airbus. At the moment, they have secured liquidity. They have withdrawn some extra liquidity as well. So the question is, at the moment, they want state aid for airlines, not for them directly. But this new warning of the CEO could mean that there's a bit of a ramp up here in the rhetoric. And on Wednesday, the manufacturer is reporting Q1 results. So that would be the opportunity to see whether now Airbus would be considering asking for state aid. Of course, nationalization is something that would be very, very much further down the line. The French government has said, of course, Airbus would be one of these companies on the list that would be helped. But of course, at the moment, Airbus asking just for help for airlines. And we see this package of Air France sending the shares higher for Air France, while Airbus, here the only stock in negative territory on the CAC 40, right at the bottom, down about 1%.
Charlotte, thank you. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in just a moment. The future of President Trump's daily virus briefings remains uncertain at this point. The commander-in-chief has called them, quote, not worth the time and effort. We'll have an update when we come back.
Start your day earlier and smarter, on top of the news.
Political turmoil and the Eurozone heating.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the Tunein podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen. While you wait for baseball season to begin, Tunein has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history. Search Classic Game Replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime. It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on Tunein.
In case you didn't know, Tunein lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with Tunein.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
He scores!
With Game Replay on Tunein, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Shooter to Connor to Fiala. He scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
While he was gone, Al had some kind of vote to make him the managing. You remember he used to come up all the time in the Raiders game that he was the managing general partner. By the way, don't forget, there was a lot going on in Munich. You know how tired that man was to come back and find out that Al Davis had strong-armed his team from him while he was gone?
Search The Right Time with Bomani Jones to listen.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
Deutsche Bank leaves the stock 600 sharply higher after the German lender posts a surprise profit for the first quarter, and investors shrug off a capital target warning. State aid hopes send Lufthansa shares sharply higher as the German economy minister says the government will ensure the carrier remains competitive after the crisis. Adidas at a standstill. The sportswear giant says revenues remain severely impacted by the outbreak, but the CEO tells this show he is hopeful for the coming months.
I believe that we will have a much better view on the speed of recovery and opening after the month of May when we're seeing the progress in Germany.
Bayer gets a boost as the virus drives demand, but the German chemical giant warns its outlook is in flux. CEO Werner Baumann tells this show it's too early to give further guidance.
For the remainder of the year, we just have to wait for a few more months until we see the lay of the land on how we re-emerge out of crisis. We are very, very prepared and working diligently through our restart activities.
Markets in Europe have now been open for about a half an hour, and we've got a strong session coming together here. European markets bouncing back after a modest retreat last week. The Stock 600 lost just over 1%, breaking a 2-week win streak. Now this week, investors firmly focused on a raft of earnings, peak week for Q1 results. We've also got a number of key central banks taking their meetings this week. We've got the ECB and the Fed coming up overnight already, an unprecedented commitment to further further bond purchases from the Bank of Japan, so setting the stage for potentially more central bank commitments throughout the coming days. Stock 600 about 1.7% higher this morning. Let's take a look at what's behind that 1.7% rise. You can see here green across the board, every sector getting a boost this morning, and some pretty sizable gains at that. The banks outperforming the broader market, up more than 3%. Autos also holding up quite well, so one of the most cyclical parts of the market, up about 2.7%. Volkswagen restarting production at several, at certainly one of its factories, and potentially several more in the coming days. Travel and leisure up 2.6%. Lufthansa, one of the key outperformers there. Insurance, financial services, and technology round out the top. We've got a number of big tech stocks reporting this week, the 5 big ones. At the bottom of the board here, we've got food and bev up just about 60 basis points, so still in positive territory. Oil and gas, utilities, household goods. Let's take a look at the individual movers this morning. I mentioned Lufthansa, which is performing quite well. Deutsche Bank, though, the best performer in the Stock 600. This does not happen that often. Clearly, investors not braced for the positive surprise that came through from the German lender this morning, beating Q1 expectations, a pre-release, given the actual numbers were so much further ahead than consensus was expecting. They were forced to pre-release those numbers. They've relaxed their capital target as they look to support the economy, support businesses further. We are seeing that bring up the broader European banking space, with Commerzbank up more than 5%, Lufthansa up 6.2%, Air France KLM up about 5.8%. So strong boost for the airlines there. And then at the bottom of the board, a little bit more of a mixed picture of the ones down here. Would just highlight Nestle coming under a little bit of pressure this morning, down about 1.4%. Jeff.
Juliana, thank you very much. Let's just take you to Beijing now, the Chinese Foreign Ministry briefing there. We do this as the Foreign Ministry, when asked about an EU report alleging China is spreading COVID-19 disinformation, said China is a victim, not an initiator. And this is going to remain an issue for some time to come, obviously. The other side aspect to this story that we should tell you about, China has threatened to stop importing Australian wine and dairy products, potentially beef and other meats, if the Scott Morrison government continues with its plans for some form of investigation into China's role in the coronavirus outbreak. So we'll just continue to watch this press briefing, and if there's anything more that we think you need to know, we'll bring it to you. Somebody who won't be doing press briefings is President Donald Trump. He's cancelled both of his daily coronavirus briefings, saying they were, quote, not worth the time and effort. The US leader blamed the media for asking hostile questions and reporting fake news following his suggestion that disinfectant could be injected as a COVID-19 treatment. This came after the president walked out of Friday's press briefing without answering any questions. A coronavirus press briefing is set for today, but it's unknown at this stage if President Trump will attend. David McCourt, founder and CEO of Granahan McCourt Capital, was on this program earlier. He says he thinks President Trump is doing, quote, an awful job in terms of managing this crisis for entrepreneurs.
I've obviously been a benefactor of some of his policies, but I don't think that any price that he could offer, any effort, any benefit that he could offer an entrepreneur would be worth the price of his leadership.
Mr. McCourt there. Well, Charles Dumas joins us, chief economist at TS Lombard. And Charles, I just want to counterpoint that with some of the perhaps more positive news that we've been hearing around lockdowns being lifted in Europe, and also Governor Cuomo talking about a phased plan potentially here for New York. How positive should we be about this messaging? And do you think that's why we are seeing this resilience in equity markets?
The answer to your second question is yes. I think the market is being moved by the news on the specifics of the lockdowns and their relaxation. As far as how meaningful it all is, I have serious doubts, because our view is that The thing that's going to cause the stock market to relapse again is the state of the economy, which is dramatically down, and therefore earnings with it in the stock market, and that, of course, influences investor behavior. And we also think that the recovery, as and when it comes from this, will be fairly modest, even on the good assumptions about solutions to the actual problems of lockdown and the disease. Specifically, we don't see that people are going to be readily going back to sports events and theatres and restaurants and bars and in close proximity with one another. So long as there isn't a vaccine, it pretty much promises that they will be safe in doing so. So the recovery of demand, which has been the cause of this downswing, is likely to be quite modest and quite slow. There'll be a little bounce and then probably a significant slowdown.
Charles, good morning to you. I've been reading the TS Lombard research over the last week or so avidly. Look, I get your degree of pessimism and realism about what we're seeing in the markets versus the economy. But one added ingredient I wanted to get your view on was market distortion. Market distortion from central banks and from governments as well, either via support mechanisms or outright buying of underlying product and ETF as well. How much can the support mechanisms distort real valuations that would reflect the underlying economy?
Well, I think the problem is that people are expecting the same sort of results from central bank intervention as we've had for most of the last 10 years, which has been extremely helpful for asset prices, not so helpful for the economy. Because, arguably, over the last 10 years, we could have done with much more Keynesian-type actual government spending and less attempted stimulus through monetary means, whether it's quantitative easing or straightforward low to negative interest rates. So there has been people have been accustomed to the idea that when central banks make a move, then everything will go up, and in particular the fiscal policy is standing in there to support firms in what are fairly dire circumstances. The problem we have is that we don't see the recovery being all that brisk, and the earnings are likely to be relatively weak all the way through this year and into next year. And as a result of all of that, we don't think that the stock market is going to be able to sustain the very high levels of prices that have been achieved over the last week or two, and look as if they're going to be achieved again today or this week, maybe. In other words, basically, we think that earnings are going to be disastrously low, and the stock market multiples will come down to reflect the rather less buoyant prospects than people are supposing, just because of the intervention of central banks. It's got to be remembered, you see, that the fiscal policy response so far has been very constructive in the sense of supporting firms through difficulties, but it hasn't got all that much going for it in terms of actual generating spending, on top of the fact that spending by private individuals, consumer spending, is weak, and business capex is likely to follow that with weakness too. So there isn't actually anything which is going to cause rapid recovery of demand in the economy, and so central banks and governments being supportive of businesses in difficulties is very nice, but it won't actually cause the recovery which the market appears to be anticipating.
Charles, I take your point. It's a bit chicken and egg, where businesses are waiting for consumers to spend to get the revenue back through the door. Consumers are waiting for businesses to spend, so it may go around in circles. I want to know about the downside potential then for the stock market, because we have climbed to a perch above 2,800 points on the S&P 500. Now, many had thought, all that stimulus, as you mentioned, there's a problem, we won't get another bottom in the market. Are you saying we could go back towards that key 2,000 level?
I am, for sure. And we think that it will, because basically on our modelling of US GDP particularly, and given what's almost certainly happened in the first quarter and is likely to have happened in the second quarter, with a modest recovery later in the year, on that modelling, we find that earnings in the S&P are likely to be down by 25%, which is one quarter, from essentially 160 on the S&P last year to 120 this year. And if you take that 120 and multiply it by a moderate, but by no means high PE ratio of, let us say, 16, bearing in mind the long-run average is 18, and these are difficult times, 16 times 120 gets you to 1920, which is under the 2,000 mark. So, yes, that's what we're expecting.
Charles, you said that in terms of the fiscal policy response, it's so far been positive, but there's nothing in it that's going to necessarily drive a recovery in growth when we start to reemerge from all of this. I'm curious, looking down the line, how you think about the risk that governments don't spend enough, but actually spend too much, because obviously that becomes problematic from a public debt perspective, which can have knock-on effects then on the economy for years to come.
Yes, it's a delicate business, this question of government intervention, and I've got to say that I do think that it will require actual government spending to cause a recovery to be as brisk as we all hope, and that, of course, if they go ahead and do that, then it will be a very difficult judgment when to start reining back in that spending. But of course, I think the key point here is that the medical side of things, which we see as being quite a serious inhibition on people for the next year or so until there's a proper vaccine, the medical side, once that's improved, and the difficulties of people associating with one another taken care of, at that stage, I wouldn't necessarily think that the government does have to be spending a whole lot more money, and so at that stage they could perfectly easily start to curb the deficits.
Charles, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for taking all our questions today. Charles Dumas, who is the chief economist at TS Lombard. Right, still plenty to come here on Squawk Box on CNBC, including what does Mr. Johnson do next? Boris Johnson back at the helm in Downing Street after his 3-week illness. He's back at the helm this morning on a COVID-19 cabinet ministers meeting. And then we hear a little bit later on in the week from the man himself, we understand, what is the strategy for exiting lockdown. We'll discuss on Squawk Box.
Squawk Box is breakfast with the most interesting people in the world.
It's a privilege to get. In case you didn't know, Tunein lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with Tunein. Whenever you're unsure of what to play next, head to the homepage and discover something new. There you'll see custom recommendations based on your listening habits, along with new episodes of shows you've enjoyed in the past. Uncover your next audio obsession on the homepage.
You love Tunein for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
Search classic game replays to listen for free.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice. Now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on Tunein, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunnin to Fiala, he scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
A social distancing tip.
Keeping your distance from others is important in slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are some fun things to do alone. Read a book, take a walk, unpack your suitcase from that trip you took last September, paint a self-portrait, catch up on a TV series, do a puzzle. Remember, we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Get your daily dose of NFL shop talk with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Start your morning off right with Around the NFL.
Injured, depleted roster into the...
The European Central Bank is expected to begin buying riskier debt, including bonds of so-called fallen angels, which have recently lost their investment-grade rating. This according to predictions by a range of economists. Cnbc sources say the ECB has not yet made a firm decision on its next steps to support the virus-hit Eurozone economy. But it recently relaxed its collateral rules to include lower-rated debt. The Governing Council is set to meet this week and will release its latest decision on Thursday. Factories and building sites in Italy will reopen from May the 4th as the country prepares to end its strict coronavirus lockdown. Other businesses, including wholesalers and retailers, will be allowed to restart over the following weeks, while public places and parks will also have restrictions lifted. However, schools will remain closed until at least September. The announcement comes as the country recorded its lowest single daily death toll since mid-March. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has warned people will still need to wear face masks and observe social distancing in public. Otherwise, the country could face a second wave.
If we don't respect the distance, if we don't respect the precautions, the epidemic curve can rise again and spin out of control. We will have more of our people dying, and at that stage the damages for our economy will be irreversible. Allow me to say that if you love Italy, you keep the distance.
France's Prime Minister will lay out a plan to ease coronavirus restrictions to Parliament this week. Lawmakers will then debate and vote on the proposal. Lockdown measures in the country have been in place since March and are set to be lifted on May the 11th. Children in Spain, meanwhile, are able to go outside for the first time in 6 weeks as the government looks to gradually relax its nationwide lockdown there. The move comes as the country reported 288 fatalities from the virus. That is its lowest daily death toll in more than a month. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says adults will be able to exercise outdoors from May the 2nd, but only if the country's coronavirus figures continue to get better.
It has cost us too much sacrifice to get here. It has cost us too much to bend the contagion curve and decrease the numbers of deceased to now risk it through an excess of anticipation. If the current evolution is maintained and if we meet the conditions set by the World Health Organization as early as May, we may consider the start of this second transition stage.
Meanwhile, police in Berlin have arrested around 100 anti-lockdown demonstrators as protests broke out in the German capital. Protesters called on the government to lift restrictions, adding it was overplaying the dangers of the pandemic. Switzerland is set to begin to ease some restrictions today in the first of 3 steps aimed at gradually reopening the economy. Swiss hospitals will be able to perform all procedures, including elective surgeries, while hair salons, massage parlors, and cosmetic studios will also open for business. The next phase will see compulsory schools and shops reopen on May the 11th, followed by universities and secondary schools on June the 8th. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has returned to Downing Street following his recovery from the virus. UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab who's been standing in for Mr. Johnson, says he's, quote, raring to go. The Prime Minister has spoken with ministers about, quote, modifying the lockdown, with the Telegraph reporting easing measures could begin around May the 7th. Meanwhile, suggestions perhaps that we'll get a statement from the Prime Minister today. Steve, you're outside Downing Street. What do you think the odds are?
Maybe, but he's not going to be on the lectern today. That seems to have been talked about quite a lot in the last 24 hours. Look, I think he needs to catch up, doesn't he? Let's be honest about it. Let's talk about it as a human being rather than the politicians to start off with. If you've got one of the toughest jobs in the country, and there's no doubt about it, he's facing one of the toughest decisions of anyone in the country over the next week or so, you want to be fully briefed. You want to be fully briefed before you go into that, and also before you face the world's press. And the world's press want to take him on over not only the lockdown, they want to take him on over testing, which by Thursday they're supposed to get to 100,000. They were about 30,000 on Saturday, so they are way short of that at the moment. They're going to take him on about PPE. They're going to take him on about Cobra meetings before all this happened, certainly to the scale it is now, whether he didn't attend 5 in a row. They're going to want to take him on about whether the simulations that were done a couple of years ago actually showed a huge lack of ventilators and PPE. If we aren't prepared now, why weren't we prepared given those simulations as well? So there are a whole host of issues. Plus he's under pressure from the grandees, the donors, the backbenchers, you name it as well, the 1922 committee, to get things going as well. And then you see surveys like this from the Association of Practicing Accountants. Over half of owner-managed business in the UK, i.e. CNBC's audience, will run out of cash in the next 12 weeks, according to a survey. Think about that. Over half of owner businesses will run out of cash in the next 12 weeks. And that's from SME point of view. And 7 out of 10 have lost half their revenue. These are depressionary, not recessionary, depressionary type economics as well. Yeah, I'd give him a couple of days to get into things, really, to get back into his stride, because as good a performer as he is at the lectern, and we know he is a strong public relations performer, he's going to have a lot of information to come back at those very important and quizzical questions.
Steve, I just want to jump in on that point. I mean, I think the UK entered the crisis on the back foot, and as Boris Johnson returns to try and chart the course for phase 2, he has to prove that he's got the system in place where people have faith. And if you look at Italy over the weekend, much griping about the reopening of the economy, that there are not the right scientific measures in place, no contact tracing and testing. That is seen as key. I mean, there's no right answer at this point, but the reality is the public needs to have enough faith in the system that they feel confident to go out into restaurants, into bars, into retail stores to buy products and engage in services, so you get a rebound in economies. If they don't have the faith, they won't return, which means you'll have a much more depressed curve. The other point is if you get a reinfection, then you can imagine what confidence will be like in the public arena. It'll be completely shot. So getting phase 2 correct is going to be very, very key. The other point I want to bring into the conversation is around Adidas this morning. What we saw on their report today was a whole huge overhang of inventories. As we talk about how you wind down that product, you've got to say that V recovery everyone was talking about initially is not going to happen, because you've got to get rid of the initial stockpile of goods that sits in warehouses and factories at this point before you start to get any improvement in the profits. So I've got to say the challenges here are just enormous, and let's see who's going to be best out of this, whether it's going to be the UK, Italy, Spain, France or the United States. I think everybody's watching which country gets it right, and that may also impact the stock market action.
Just extending your point, Karen, the conversation now feels like it's turning to stimulus or potential stimulus. And Charles Dumas made the point that so far the fiscal response we've seen has been positive. It has supported businesses in bridging this gap between now and reopening the economy. But there's really nothing out in the fiscal sphere that is going to stimulate a recovery. And in order to have these high public debt piles be sustainable, we'll need to see a pickup in growth. And as you say, consumer sentiment and business spending likely to be very suppressed without more stimulus coming through.
Mañana. That's what the markets are telling you, isn't it, Juliana? They are saying, you know what, we will worry about the economic issue when we have to worry about the economic issue. For the time being, we have liquidity, and we still have 1 or 2 companies that are able to surprise on the earnings front. And I just want to have a look at this wall as we go to break. and wrap up Squawk Box, because Deutsche Bank is currently up over 10%. And now this is a business that, in 4 or 5 years has only reported losses, but they were able to tell us that at least they had a brighter first quarter. We'll wait and see what the second and the third quarter delivers. But for the time being, European markets are stronger. As we wrap up Squawk Box, Juliana will be back in just a moment with the rest of the team for Street Signs.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong.
While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history. Search Classic Game Replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime. It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slapshot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Connor to Fiala. He scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
To help make the most of your time at home, TuneIn is sharing our top activities for social distancing. Tip 3, have a game night. In fact, why not make it a game day? Whether you're quarantined with kids or roommates, nothing passes the time like a game of cards, Pictionary, charades, dominoes, or Never Have I Ever. If you've got the hardware, break out the video game console and enjoy hours of guilt-free gaming. For more indoor inspiration, search Listen From Home on TuneIn.
Not all heroes wear capes, but most wear tights.
And here we go. Now it's underway. Cover on Rowan. Wait seconds.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis of the latest WrestleMania, turn on the WWE podcast. Or listen to the Steve Austin Show for no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities.
It's good to be here tonight. It's an empty building.
For these and more, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling. Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in the front office, and you know, when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these
City.
and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn. Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on Tunein. Get your daily dose of NFL shop talk with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Start your morning off right with Around the NFL.
Injured, depleted roster into the...
Unlimited bond buying in a move that sends Asian equities higher and also sets the stage for the Fed and ECB meetings later this week.
And UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson returns to work to lay out a plan to lift Britain's lockdown as Italy allows factories to reopen. Spain lets children outside, and France looks to approve its exit plan in Parliament. Well, a very warm welcome to Street Signs. You can see there outside of Downing Street, we are awaiting Prime Minister Boris Johnson, expected to give a statement this morning. This is the first day he's returning to work in 3 weeks after suffering and recovering from the coronavirus. So we will keep an eye on that and bring you the Prime Minister's comments as soon as they come in. Meanwhile, let's get a check on European markets. We are off to a roaring start this week. The Stoxx 600 rallying 1.7% in the first hour of the trading session. Last week, we saw a modest retreat for European equities. The main benchmark ended just about 1% lower. Now this week, focus firmly turning toward the reopening of the European economy, with several countries over the weekend announcing their plans to ease the lockdown measures. The United Kingdom is the outlier in that respect. We're still waiting for clarification around the UK's strategy to reopening the economy. So that's a focus point for investors. Also, it is peak week for Q1 earnings in the United States and here in Europe. We've already heard from a number of companies across the different sectors this morning. We've also got major central bank meetings this week overnight. The Bank of Japan pledging more support, unprecedented commitment to buying bonds. And then we've got the ECB and the Federal Reserve coming up later this week. Let's dive into the individual markets. Let's see which regions are outperforming, underperforming this morning. I mentioned we've heard from Spain, Italy, France in terms of intention to ease lockdown measures there. Here's a look at sectors. We'll hopefully have regions for you in just a moment, but here's a look at the sectors. Banks strongly outperforming this morning, up about 3.3%. Autos, travel and leisure, insurance, and basic resources round out the top of the Stoxx 600. On the downside, we've got food and bev up just about 75 basis points, but that is the worst part of the market. So important to recognize here the extent of the gains we're seeing this morning. And banks obviously are rallying in part on the back of the Bank of Japan news, but also this fresh, surprising news out of Deutsche Bank, which let's detail for you now. In terms of what we've heard from Deutsche Bank this morning, if we could highlight that story for you and perhaps take a look at the Deutsche Bank stock. Deutsche Bank shares up more than 11.5% this morning, and this is after they pre-released some strong Q1 numbers. They have surprised on the revenue front, and they've also scrapped their target when it comes to capital. They had a 12.5% core tier 1 2020 capital target. They have said that they may temporarily come up short when it comes to hitting this target, but the reason is they want to support more lending to the economy and support their clients. And investors seem very surprised and positively reacting this morning to that news. Let's get out to Annetta, who can bring us some more on this story. Annetta, does this news change the trajectory for Deutsche Bank as an equity story?
I wouldn't go as far as saying that. I mean, remember, Deutsche Bank was trading at roughly 10 euro before the outbreak of the coronavirus crisis, and now we are sitting just above 6 euros. So I think the equity story is still like, and it's not the greatest for now, but obviously it's about the outlook and also about that they show us now that they can actually generate higher revenues. That was one of the main sort of concerns from investors when it comes to their restructuring plan, that Deutsche Bank is cutting assets aggressively, selling business, but at the same time, they were saying in their targets that they want to increase revenues, and this didn't happen during the last quarters, and this quarter is actually a positive surprise. We are seeing revenues sitting comfortably above 6 billion euro at 6.4 billion euro. So it will be interesting to see on Wednesday when they publish their full data set where that revenue actually came from. I mean, the most realistic assumption is that it comes from investment banking, because Wall Street Bank also benefited from the very volatile market environment. Of course, Deutsche Bank has shattered its equity sales business, but still they're very big in fixed income trading, so their so-called FIC unit should have benefited quite a lot from the market turmoil in the first quarter. So what they're saying as well, obviously, is that they're expecting loan losses to go up, and we are seeing also that their provisions are going up quite a bit to 500 million euro. But it's quite clear that this crisis, we were discussing that concerning various banks, in this crisis the banks are part of the solution, and the governments need them in order to channel the money to the real economy. And we see that here in Germany quite impressively, that banks like Deutsche Bank, they have set up specified teams in order to actually work the demand for loans, and that's what Sebing is saying as well, that their clients need them now quite a bit, and that's also why the capital ratio is going down. And I guess regulators in that current market environment are quite humble when it comes to treating banks and their capital position. We have seen a lot of relief coming from the regulator in that respect. So bottom line, positive numbers. Shares are up by more than 10%. I don't remember when I've seen that last when it comes to Deutsche Bank shares. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Annette, for that update on Deutsche Bank. A really remarkable share price reaction we're seeing this morning. I know, as I mentioned, we are expecting to hear from Prime Minister Boris Johnson. You've got a shot there of Downing Street. That is a live shot. We have just seen that lectern put out and set up. He is due to speak at any moment now. This is the first day that he's come back to work in over a month. A lot of burning questions from the British public on the UK's strategy in terms of coming out of this lockdown. Let's get out to Steve, who joins us now with more. Steve, what is going to be the first priority for Boris Johnson as he gets back to work today?
No doubt about it. The NHS has to sort out all its remaining issues, as expounded by the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab yesterday, that unless you have an NHS that can cope in various situations, and possibly one of those being a second wave and more infections and more mortality and more hospital admissions, you cannot get the country back to work. There is a very clear chronology as far as UK government is concerned. And as you say, we went into lockdown on March 23rd. Boris Johnson went into hospital on April 5th. On April 12th, Boris Johnson came out of hospital, and now we're not due to have the second reviewed, or the second lockdown period reviewed, until later next week, May the 7th, I beg your pardon. So there's a lot of things that need to sort out before the country can get back to work. That's not to say that areas of the country haven't been getting back. We've seen it in a lot of industrial companies, Jaguar Land Rover talking about it. We've seen it in some retailers, the likes of B&Q. And of course, we've seen it in the construction sector plenty, with many companies picking up tools yet again as well. But there are a whole host of issues that need to be sorted out, not least the fact that many of the backers of the Prime Minister are looking for a clear strategy rather than the government knowing it themselves. They want the schools to know what it is. They want the institutions to know what it is. They want the National Health Service to know what it is. And, of course, industry as well, at a time when many businesses, big and small, are really suffering cash flow and facing imminent existential problems as well. And this comes as the death toll in the United Kingdom reached a grim milestone over the last few days. Over 20,000 mortalities in the UK, and that's just in hospitals alone. Some estimates say it could be twice as many as 41,000 deaths in the UK. And yet, a couple of grains of hope from that. One, the death toll as of yesterday was only 413 higher in the previous 24-hour period in hospitals. Again, I hasten to add, that is one of the lowest figures we've seen on a daily basis for the last month. Plus the fact there are now many estimates from NHS England, from the ONS, and from some of the scientific community who believe that we hit our peak infection rates in this first wave, and we know there'll possibly be second waves, especially if the country gets back to work, that they believe that we hit the peak infections and mortalities around about 8th of April. So there are high hopes as well that we are on the mend as well. And I'm told actually now that I think Boris Johnson is going to the lectern now, and you can probably just see a shot of him behind me, and I believe we'll be taking this speech.
I'm sorry I've been away from my desk for much longer than I would have liked, and I want to thank everybody who has stepped up, in particular the First Secretary of State, Dominic Raab, who's done a terrific job. But once again, I want to thank you, the people of this country, for the sheer grit and guts you've shown and are continuing to show. Every day, I know that this virus brings new sadness and mourning to households across the land. And it is still true that this is the biggest single challenge this country has faced since the war. And I in no way minimize the continuing problems we face. And yet it is also true that we are making progress with fewer hospital admissions, fewer COVID patients in ICU, and real signs now that we are passing through the peak. And thanks to your forbearance, your good sense, your altruism, your spirit of community, thanks to our collective national resolve, we are on the brink of achieving that first clear mission to prevent our National Health Service from being overwhelmed in a way that tragically we have seen elsewhere. And that is how and why we are now beginning to turn the tide. If this virus were a physical assailant, an unexpected and invisible mugger, which I can tell you from personal experience it is, then this is the moment when we have begun together to wrestle it to the floor. And so it follows that this is the moment of opportunity. This is the moment when we can press home our advantage. It is also the moment of maximum risk, because I know there will be many people looking now at our apparent success and beginning to wonder whether now is the time to go easy on those social distancing measures. And I know how hard and how stressful it has been to give up, even temporarily, those ancient and basic freedoms, not seeing friends, not seeing loved ones, working from home, managing the kids, worrying about your job and your firm. So let me say directly also to British business, to the shopkeepers, to the entrepreneurs, to the hospitality sector, to everyone on whom our economy depends. I understand your impatience. I share your anxiety. And I know that without our private sector, without the drive and commitment of the wealth creators of this country, there will be no economy to speak of. There will be no cash to pay for our public services, no way of funding our NHS. And yes, I can see the long-term consequences of lockdown as clearly as anyone. And so yes, I entirely share your urgency. It's the government's urgency. And yet we must also recognize the risk of a second spike, the risk of losing control of that virus and letting the reproduction rate go back over 1. Because that would mean not only a new wave of death and disease, but also an economic disaster. And we would be forced once again to slam on the brakes across the whole country and the whole economy, and reimpose restrictions in such a way as to do more and lasting damage. And so I know it is tough, and I want to get this economy moving as fast as I can, but I refuse to throw away all the effort and the sacrifice of the British people, and to risk a second major outbreak and huge loss of life and the overwhelming of the NHS. And I ask you to contain your impatience, because I believe we are coming now to the end of the first phase of this conflict. And in spite of all the suffering, we have so nearly succeeded. We defied so many predictions. We did not run out of ventilators or ICU beds. We did not allow our NHS to collapse. And on the contrary, we have so far collectively shielded our NHS so that our incredible doctors and nurses and healthcare staff have been able to shield all of us from an outbreak that would have been far worse. And we collectively flattened the peak. And so when we're sure that this first phase is over and that we're meeting our 5 tests, deaths falling, NHS protected, rate of infection down, really sorting out the challenges of testing and PPE, avoiding a second peak, then that will be the time to move on to the second phase, in which we continue to suppress the disease and keep the reproduction rate, the R rate, down, but begin gradually to refine the economic and social restrictions, and one by one to fire up the engines of this vast UK economy. And in that process, difficult judgments will be made. And we simply cannot spell out now how fast or slow or even when those changes will be made, though clearly the government will be saying much more about this in the coming days. And I want to serve notice now that these decisions will be taken with the maximum possible transparency. And I want to share all our working and our thinking, my thinking, with you, the British people. And of course, we will be relying, as ever, on the science to inform us, as we have from the beginning. But we will also be reaching out to build the biggest possible consensus across business, across industry, across all parts of our United Kingdom, across party lines, bringing in opposition parties as far as we possibly can, because I think that's no less than what the British people would expect. And I can tell you now that preparations are underway and have been for weeks to allow us to win phase 2 of this fight, as I believe we are now on track to prevail in phase 1. And so I say to you finally, if you can keep going in the way that you have kept going so far, if you can help protect our NHS to save lives, and if we as a country can show the same spirit of optimism and energy shown by Captain Tom Moore, who turns 100 this week, if we can show the same spirit of unity and determination as we have all shown in the past 6 weeks, then I have absolutely no doubt that we will beat it together. We will come through this all the faster, and the United Kingdom will emerge stronger than ever before. Thank you all very much.
So there we had the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson back in very good form, it has to be said. Of course, you'll recall his predecessor Theresa May when making some key speeches, voice faltering on many occasions due to health concerns. Boris Johnson has been through COVID-19 and back and performing incredibly strongly at the lectern, but did his words chime with the British public and with British business, which is absolutely champing at the bit at the moment to get back to some form of normality, or at least some form of business as well. Let's go through what the Prime Minister said. Not surprisingly, he started off with his praise for the NHS, which he credits with saving his life, calling the virus itself an invisible mugger, which only now is the country wrestling to the fore. Moment of maximum risk, though, is what the Prime Minister was saying. This is that moment, and social distancing, easing up now, would risk everything that has gone on as well. To Business Britain, he was saying he understands the impatience, he understands the anxiety and this sense of urgency as well, but he was saying that the country must not risk a second spike. And you'll notice twice the Prime Minister talking about that all-important R rate, i.e. R rate of 1 or above means it is reproducing faster than it is diminishing, but below 1 is where it currently is, and he's very concerned about it starting again. But he was very clear, we are at the end, or coming to the end, of phase 1, and he refused to throw away all that effort of the British people and indeed put pressure back on the NHS as well. Again, saying the country has shielded the NHS, so the NHS can shield the country as well, and reiterated those 5 Dominic Raab tests that we heard reiterated again over the weekend by the Foreign Secretary and previously about being ready for the NHS to encounter a second wave and having enough incubators, having enough PPP as well. He said, I cannot spell out to you now what the measures are going to be, but we will fire up this vast UK economy, is what the Prime Minister said there. But there would be more from the government in coming days with a reliance on science and more transparency. And of course, the government has been accused of patronising the country with not giving enough transparency. The Prime Minister there promising not only more transparency, but also to bring opposition parties on board. Now, there will be a degree of scepticism about that last comment, of course, as well, because it was the last Prime Minister as well who talked about potentially bringing the opposition parties on board to form some form of coalition of interest so we can walk forward together as well. But I wonder how Sir Keir Starmer would feel about that. Potentially a trap for the Labour opposition, one might suggest as well. But he wants to get the rest of society on board, and that preparations are underway for phase 2. And perhaps shamelessly, the UK Prime Minister mentioning the national hero of the day, of course, Captain Tom Moore, 99-year-old, who have raised tens of millions for the NHS as well, who turns 100, and said that we should channel the spirit of Captain Tom Moore. So a lot there from the Prime Minister in his speech on return to work. Back to you.
Steve, thank you so much. And I can't help but think of the comment you raised earlier this morning about Boris Johnson being a master communicator, and it was really a reminder watching him speak there, listening to him, what a difference it potentially can make to have somebody really leading at the helm and communicating the government message strongly. All right, well, let's leave the UK there for a moment and push on and talk broader Europe. Factories and building sites in Italy will reopen from May 4th as the country prepares to end its strict coronavirus lockdown. Other businesses, including wholesalers and retailers, will be able to restart over the following weeks, while public places and parks will also have restrictions lifted. However, schools will remain closed until at least September. The announcement comes as the country recorded its lowest single-day death toll since mid-March. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has warned that people will still need to wear face masks and observe social distancing in public. Otherwise, the country could face a second wave of the disease.
If we don't respect the distance, if we don't respect the precautions, the epidemic curve can rise again and spin out of control. We will have more of our people dying, and at that stage the damages for our economy will be irreversible. Allow me to say that if you love Italy, you keep the distance.
Meanwhile, France's prime minister will lay out a plan to ease coronavirus restrictions to Parliament this week. Lawmakers will then debate and vote on the proposal. Lockdown measures in the country have been in place since March and are set to be lifted on May 11th. Over in Spain, children were able to go outside for the first time in 6 weeks as the government looks to gradually relax a nationwide lockdown. Spain reported 288 fatalities from the virus, its lowest daily death toll in more than a month. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez added that adults will be able to exercise outdoors from May 2nd, but only if the country's coronavirus figures continue to improve.
It has cost us too much sacrifice to get here. It has cost us too much to bend the contagion curve and decrease the numbers of deceased to now risk it through an excess of anticipation. If the current evolution is maintained and if we meet the conditions set by the World Health Organization as early as May, we may consider the start of this second transition stage.
Over in Switzerland, the country will begin to ease some coronavirus restrictions today. In the first of 3 steps aimed at gradually reopening the country's economy, Swiss hospitals will be able to perform all procedures, including elective surgeries, while hair salons, massage parlors, and cosmetic studios will also open for business. The next phases will see compulsory schools and shops reopen on May 11th, followed by universities and secondary schools on June 8th. Let's bring in our first guest, Charlotte de Montpellier, economist from ING. Charlotte, really appreciate you being with us, coming to us from Brussels this morning. Charlotte, we were just hearing from Boris Johnson. He's reemerged back to work the first time in almost a month. And here in the UK, the stance around exiting a lockdown has been a lot more resistant or reticent than we've seen in countries like Switzerland. Boris Johnson emphasizing the risk of a second wave. Why has Switzerland been able to get so far ahead of the curve that they are able to open today when a country like the UK is still reluctant to even talk about reopening?
Yeah, but in Switzerland, the lockdown started very early, way before the UK, and the economic situation is quite difficult now in Switzerland, so they see the need to open again the economy. The health situation is under control, so they think it's the right time to start again. We know that 1.5 million people are currently temporarily unemployed in Switzerland, which is the equivalent to 30% of the total workforce, so they really see the need to open it again, given that the health situation is under control. And that's the reason, I guess, why Switzerland is ahead of the curve right now.
And in terms of the policy response, Switzerland has really done an excellent job. Their small business funding scheme has been branded a success, I think, by most economists. What was so efficient about the way this scheme was structured? Because we're really waiting to see whether these other schemes around the world will have the intended effect of helping small businesses in the way that Switzerland has actually seen.
Yeah, so first of all, the Swiss aid program was quite large, really large. So it's the equivalent to 8.5% of GDP. And the reason that it's so large is because Switzerland has a significant advantage compared to other countries. It has a very low public debt and it has all the needs necessary to support business. So it was really quick to implement. And also they are really efficient in the way they structure the administrative task. Because they have all the means necessary, they can really be fast for that, and that's really the reason they have been more successful. We know that the aid program right now is the largest ever in Switzerland, and that's allow small companies to be able to receive support from the government quite fast, because this is a large program and it can be even larger in some weeks. The government has already said that it will be larger. So it means that the means are there and they want to make it as successful as possible, and they manage to do it.
What does this all mean for the Swiss franc? Because, you mentioned one of the key pillars to why this program was so successful, this small business funding scheme, is because they threw so much money at it. They're in a much stronger debt position going into this than many other European countries. We're still awaiting, real agreement from the European leaders when it comes to a coordinated fiscal response. So all of this suggests that there's going to be more upward pressure on the Swiss franc. What's your take?
Yeah, as you all know, that the Swiss franc is considered as a safe haven by international investors, and the currency tends to appreciate sharply in times of crisis such as the current one. So there is not so much risk as a depreciation as the Swiss franc. The risk is quite the opposite, that the Swiss franc tends to appreciate really a lot when we have a crisis like that. And the problem is that it has a severe impact on the Swiss economy, because the Swiss economy is quite open and it exports a lot. So 66% of GDP is exports in Switzerland to other countries such as the US and Germany and the other countries in the Eurozone, which means that, the Swiss francs still tend to be strong those days. It's not good for the economy, And that's the reason why the Swiss National Bank is currently intervening a lot on the foreign exchange market to prevent the Swiss franc to appreciate too much. It's trying to prevent the euro Swiss franc to go below 1.05. The problem is that we are not sure the Swiss National Bank can continue for long to intervene that much on the foreign exchange market. We know that Switzerland is on the US watching list for currency manipulation, which means that Switzerland could receive sanctions by the US if it intervenes too much on the foreign exchange market, which means that they may not be able to continue that program. And we know that if the Swiss franc appreciates too much, it will be really bad for the Swiss economy, and it could lead the Swiss economy to have a worse year than we can think of now. So it's a major risk for the economy, but for now it seems to be under control because the Swiss National Bank intervened a lot on the Swiss exchange, on the foreign exchange market.
Very clear, Charlotte. Appreciate you being with us this morning. Charlotte de Montpellier, economist from ING. Well, we're going to squeeze in a quick break, but coming up on Street Signs, survival at stake. Find out why the CEO of Airbus is issuing a harsh warning to staff after the break.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on Tunein, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
Wi-Fi connection spotty? Make sure you're never without something to listen to by offlining your podcasts on Tunein. Just find your favorite podcast and tap the 3 dots to download the episodes you want to hear. When you're off the grid, you'll find all your offline audio under your favorites. In case you didn't know, Tunein lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with Tunein.
You love Tunein for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on Tunein.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Introducing a new podcast, ESPN Daily, hosted by me, Mina Kimes. When you want to go beyond your feed, when you want to get inside the score, when you want to get behind the highlight, there's ESPN Daily. Go deeper into the stories of the moment. Get the exclusive access and insider perspective that only ESPN can give you. The best sports story all day, 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week. ESPN Daily.
Search ESPN Daily to listen.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
Search Classic Game Replays to listen for free.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your 7th inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. The app.
Welcome back to Street Signs. I'm Juliana Tattlebaum with Steve Sedgwick. These are your headlines.
The moment of maximum risk. Boris Johnson returns to work, telling the British public that any lifting of lockdown measures risks a second wave of infections.
I can see the long-term consequences of lockdown as clearly as anyone. And so, yes, I entirely share your urgency. It's the government's urgency. And yet we must also recognize the risk of a second spike.
The Bank of Japan launches an unprecedented expansion of its QE program, pledging unlimited bond buying in a move that sends Asian equities higher and set the stage for the Fed and ECB meetings later this week. Deutsche Bank leads the Stock 600 sharply higher after the German lender posts a surprise profit for the first quarter, and investors shrug off a capital target warning. State aid hopes send Lufthansa shares sharply higher as the German economy minister says the government will ensure the carrier remains competitive after the crisis. Let's get you a little bit more detail on that Bank of Japan move. The BOJ plans to boost its bond buying programs to unprecedented levels to help the Japanese economy combat the coronavirus crisis. The central bank has pledged to buy up to 20 trillion yen of corporate bonds and commercial paper, almost tripling the previous cap of 7 trillion. It's also scrapped its previous guidance to buy around 80 trillion yen of government paper this year, instead saying it will buy as much as needed to keep the yield of the 10-year bond at 0. Meanwhile, profits at Chinese industrial firms fell nearly 35% year-on-year in March. The decline marks a slight easing from February's 38% drop. That was the largest fall since 2010. Only 8 of 41 sectors recorded profits in the month. A sign of the world's second largest economy is struggling to recover from the outbreak amid lagging domestic and international demand. Let's take a look at Asian markets in the overnight session. That Bank of Japan news clearly providing a boost to sentiment there. The Nikkei 225 leading the charge higher, up 2.7%. Over in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng also trading firmly, up about 1.9% for the session. Chinese markets lagging, but still in positive territory there. Shanghai Composite up about 0.25%, and the Shenzhen just behind it. Taking a look at U.S. futures, last week we saw markets end the week lower, breaking a 2-week win streak. Oil price volatility, one of the key themes of the week. Now we are looking forward to central banks this week. We, of course, are digesting that Bank of Japan news, which set the stage for the Federal Reserve meeting taking place this week, as well as the ECB meeting. And then also the earnings front. We are seeing a peak week for Q1 earnings in the United States. The highlight, or one of the key highlights, will be big tech reporting. 5 of the major technology companies will give us some insight into what they've seen over the quarter and what they expect in the months ahead. So looking at U.S. futures there, we've got the Dow Jones set to open nearly 200 points higher. The NASDAQ and the S&P 500 also poised for a strong start. European markets, as you can see here, strong gains across the board this morning, led higher by the German index as well as the FTSE MIB, both trading more than 2% higher. The CAC 40 also holding up well, up about 1.6%. Here in the UK, we've got the FTSE 100 trading about 1.4% higher. Attention in the market seems to be focused on the reopening of several European economies over the weekend. We heard from Spain, Italy, France, all announcing what they plan to do to reduce the confinement measures currently in place. Boris Johnson, as we just were watching, has said the UK not quite ready to think about reopening just yet. He did not give any time frame, so we'll see how the UK public reacts to that in the coming hours. Now, several corporates in focus this morning, in addition to all those macro level factors driving trade. Bayer trading 3.7% higher after the chemicals company posted a 10% jump in first quarter pre-tax earnings. The German drug company added the coronavirus pandemic has caused an uptick in demand, although it says it's unclear if it will be able to maintain that bounce. The group, which also makes pesticides, said that the looming downturn and squeeze on liquidity has forced it to take a tougher stance in its glyphosate lawsuit claims in the United States. Speaking to CNBC earlier this morning, Bayer CEO Werner Baumann said the company had worked hard to maintain its supply chains in the first quarter, but the challenges may still lie ahead.
We have a very resilient supply chain. We've worked very, very hard to keep our production and supply chain and entire value chain up and running throughout the first quarter. Some of it pays back big dividends right now because we are able to respond to a fairly volatile demand, and we expect to be able to do so also going forward. And that means depending on how the infection patterns move, we will see further volatility. We are prepared to dealing with it, and let's see what the remainder of the year brings. There are going to be positives and negatives.
Another key German stock in focus for investors this morning, Adidas. Shares in Adidas have turned positive despite posting a 19% fall in first quarter sales and predicting a 40% drop for the second quarter. Adidas says around 70% of the shops remain shut and it is unclear when they will reopen. Adidas shares now trading about 1.9% higher. Speaking to CNBC earlier, Adidas CEO Kasper Rorsted said the company was looking at financial vehicles to raise money in the short term, but its goal ultimately is to regain organic growth.
At this stage, we have about $5 billion of liquidity. Part of it, what we had already on the balance sheet, and then we had a state bank loan that was, I would say, spearheaded by UniCredit. Right now, we're of course looking upon other financial vehicles, but the most important part is to bring down the loans and and the debt position we have is really getting in to grow organically again, and that's going to take a while. You saw the guidance for the second quarter. So right now, that's not our primary concern. Our primary concern was having a strong balance sheet that can take us through a crisis over a longer period of time, and that is what we have now done.
Well, shifting gears to the airline space, German economy minister Peter Olmeyer has said the government wants to ensure that, quote, large and important companies such as Lufthansa remain competitive after the crisis. The government has not yet made a decision on the struggling airlines aid package, but apparently that commentary enough to get the stock going. It is up about 7% this morning. Elsewhere in the airline space, Air France KLM is set to receive 7 billion euros from the French government. French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said the package was needed to save the French airline amid an unprecedented industry crisis, but warned that the money would come with strings attached. And shares in Air France KLM also bouncing sharply this morning, up nearly 3.5%. Now, in the airline supply chain, Airbus, one of the key players, has seen some harsh commentary come through over the weekend. The CEO of Airbus has warned the group's survival is at stake. In an employee memo seen by Reuters, Guillaume Faure said the company was, quote, bleeding cash at an unprecedented speed. And Airbus shares are coming under pressure this morning, trading down about 3.3%. So pretty significant commentary coming through on both the airline side of things and also in the aerospace side of things, with a crucial supply part, of course, when it comes to airlines. Let's get out to Charlotte on this story for more. Charlotte, what does the path forward look like for Airbus, in particular, given we're seeing governments step in and support the airlines, which are obviously the crucial demand factor for Airbus?
Well, this package coming for Air France KLM would be good news for Airbus, of course, and including because they have some orders, standing orders with Airbus, and they confirmed they will carry on with receiving those planes. And that's what Airbus have said in the past few weeks. They say at the moment they don't need state aid, but they are calling for state aid for airlines, of course, airlines, their customers, the ones buying their planes. Airbus is trying to respond to this new environment where planes are virtually grounded and airlines are trying to hold on to cash to try and survive this acute phase of the crisis here, while there's no traveling at all around the world. So they have already slashed production by about a third. They have, of course, suspended their 2020 outlook, and of course suspend their dividend as well. They're saying they try to adapt and see, but this latest call by CEO Guillaume Faure was one of the starkest one we've heard from the companies. They had their bleeding cash at that unprecedented speed, and at the very stake of the survival of Airbus is at stake. You could argue that Airbus is in a slightly better position that its competitor Boeing itself coming out of its own MAX crisis. But of course, after a decade of growth there for the plane manufacturers, now this new environment where they try to adapt to see the demand and when and how the demand will come back from airlines themselves trying to figure out when travel will come back. Air France KLM CEO warning that he doesn't see business going back to normal within 2 years, if not a bit longer. So here trying to decipher how it will look like, and trying to see when demand will come back. So Airbus is reporting Q1 numbers on Wednesday, so it'll be interesting to see whether Airbus is starting to think about taking actually state aid or whether job cuts could be on the cards. So it'll be something to look at. But we see that these warnings from the CEO are sending shares for Airbus about 3% this morning on the French market. Juliana?
Charlotte, thank you so much for bringing us the latest. Let's talk tech. Tech's Big Five will dominate earnings season this week, with investors keen to see how coronavirus has impacted their businesses. The companies offering cloud-based services, therefore enabling work-from-home practices like Amazon and Microsoft, have performed well so far this year. But companies relying on advertising and selling hardware like Apple and Alphabet have suffered in light of the outbreak. Let's get out to Karen, who joins us with more on these tech earnings that are due to come through this week. Karen, they're so dominant from a market cap perspective. I'm curious, what's your take on this earnings season, whether that will reinforce the view that they should be dominant or cause investors to rethink?
Juliana, 5 major companies that represent 20% of the S&P 500 market cap. So if you just tally up Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and Google, very significant. And you've seen just how much the markets have swung on the back of some of these individual names. When it comes to the winners, the tech analyst Gene Munster is calling Apple and Tesla potential winners this time round, particularly if you look at Tesla's market share. Apple, of course, we're going to be looking at the demand side around iPhones. Elsewhere, though, well, in terms of the market winners, it's been Amazon and Microsoft because of remote working that has pushed many towards those two trends around cloud services, but also with deliveries, with Amazon being out in front. Now, the other fear is that if you get these stocks battered, then whether that's the likes of Apple and Google, you may see long-term investors trying to step in and buy the long-term trend and pick up these stocks. So we might be in for a volatile week. When it comes to the first out of the ranks, it'll be Alphabet. That company will be reporting. Expect a big hit to advertising for Google, very much geared towards the travel industry. And you've already seen that industry effectively cancel $3 billion worth of ads in the second quarter. So there will be a hit there, but expect maybe a pickup in interest in Google Cloud. Also YouTube, with so many people under lockdown. Other ones to look out for, Facebook. Well, revenue was already slowing coming into this crisis, so it needed to pivot towards e-commerce and also fintech. It needs to have a good crisis to try and further those ambitions after some of its reputation was damaged around those privacy concerns. But you will expect to see the company see a massive hit from that advertising side of the business in the meantime. It did ink a deal last week with Jio Platforms in India. That will help it monetize its WhatsApp platform. Expect increased traffic across those platforms. The problem is monetizing. So having a good crisis, very important to the revenue factor down the line. Microsoft, well, many of us have been using Teams, working remotely. You will see a pickup because of those earnings. The record recently, daily record, 2.7 billion meeting minutes. That is up 200% from what you had in mid-March as lockdowns were beginning. That will be a strong boost. Also, Azure, it was already stealing market share from Amazon. Expect a pickup in that part of the business. Apple, who wants to buy $1,000 plus iPhone when they might have their job in doubt this time? That'll be quite key, the demand story. Also, the iPhone 12 cycle, how it will be rolled back, whether it's pushed back from fall to the holiday season, just to ensure smooth rollout across the board. That is what we're looking at for very closely. And Amazon, clearly the winner here, as you've seen a real pickup in deliveries. Don't forget Amazon Web Services, with its high margin business, used to support the rollout of the marketplace, but the marketplace might look a little bit healthier these days, Juliana. So a lot for investors to rake over this week on the growth side.
Karen, thank you so much for running it through us. Look forward to your analysis as those results come through. Well, we're going to squeeze in a break now. When we come back, President Trump pulls out of his daily coronavirus press conferences over the weekend, hitting out at the media's approach to the briefings.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on Tunein, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
In case you didn't know, Tunein lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with Tunein. Did you know with TuneIn's local radio feature, you can stream live FM and AM stations in smooth streaming quality and discover local news, talk, and music stations you didn't even know existed. Navigate to the local radio section under Browse to listen locally on TuneIn.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen. While you wait for baseball season to begin, Tunein has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history.
There it goes, 3-2 pitches, hit in the air and hit well. Center field, Bader back, at the wall, it's gone!
Search classic game replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime.
Ground ball out to Jackie Robinson, up with it, over to Reese for one, back to Hodges, it gets away from him, Barra's trying to go to second.
It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on TuneIn.
Hey, it's Jacoby here from Jalen and Jacoby. And after you watch The Last Dance on ESPN, which you're obviously going to do just like the rest of us stuck in our homes in quarantine, you can join Jalen Rose and I for Jalen and Jacoby, The After Show. And we will be joined by the director of the documentary series, Jason Eyre, to discuss each episode in detail. You can hear our after show right here on ESPN Radio on Sunday nights after the episodes air. And they'll be available on the Jalen and Jacoby podcast feed.
Search Jalen and Jacoby to listen today. Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
Pass to the 5! Touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for... Where do we stand? The markets, the impact on startups, travel, oil.
We just heard the latest numbers on COVID-19.
And the virus. Squawk Alley, 11 a.m. Eastern today. Watch or listen live on the CNBC app.
Welcome back to Street Signs. President Trump canceled both of his daily coronavirus press briefings over the weekend, saying they were, quote, not worth the time and effort. The U.S. leader blamed the media for asking hostile questions and reporting fake news following his suggestions that disinfectant could be injected as a COVID-19 treatment. Our NBC colleague Tracy Potts joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Tracy, all morning we've been talking about the different measures European governments are taking to begin reopening their economies. What's the latest from the United States?
Well, in the United States, the federal government has issued guidelines, but left it up to each of the 50 states' governors to determine when and how to reopen. And now there's a concern that some are jumping the gun, that they're doing it too soon. 4 states that are reopening this week, the federal government says are doing so against guidelines. That guideline was to wait until coronavirus cases were dropping for 14 days before even considering reopening. And some of these states are doing it before that. Others are partially reopening restaurants or other particular businesses, and others being much more cautious. New York, where that area has really been the hot spot for the United States, saying they won't even consider anything until mid-month. Then they'll take a look at their numbers, and then they will start very slowly with low-risk professions like construction, mostly outside, and essential businesses 14 days after that, if things seem to be going well, and that they will take it community by community instead of looking at the numbers statewide. The federal government today will be taking a look at this. President Trump has a video teleconference with all of those state governors today, and he will likely face questions about what he said before the weekend, this suggestion of injecting disinfectants to kill the virus. President Trump says he was being sarcastic, but some states say they have been flooded with phone calls about whether that's safe.
Thank you so much for bringing us the latest. I look forward to your continued updates throughout the week. Tracy Potts, NBC News. Back here in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said the government will outline its lockdown exit strategy in the coming days as he made his first public appearance since recovering from COVID-19. However, he warned the country currently faces, quote, the moment of maximum risk of a second wave. Let's get out to Steve, who joins us now. Steve, really interesting to hear Boris Johnson after nearly a month away from the spotlight. Do you think that the pressure will remain on the UK government to ratchet up their transparency and communication with the public around when we may see things ease when it comes to the lockdown?
Oh, yes, absolutely no doubt about it. The answer to that question is yes, Juliana. There's no doubt about it as well that Boris Johnson possesses oratory skills that none of his cabinet colleagues have anywhere near. Let's face it, we've seen some pretty awful presentations from some of his colleagues over the last couple of weeks when Boris Johnson's been out of action. Of course, we know that he went into isolation first in the flat above number 11 Downing Street, and then on the 5th of April went into St Thomas's Hospital, and then into intensive care and was released on the 12th of April, and thereafter has been in convalescence. He returned to Downing Street last night, and goodness me, the government from a communications point of view has missed him, but it doesn't actually change too much about the huge questions facing the UK economy. Let's first listen in, though, to what the Prime Minister just said.
I want to get this economy moving as fast as I can, but I refuse to throw away all the effort and the sacrifice of the British people and to risk a second major outbreak and huge loss of life and the overwhelming of the NHS. And I ask you to contain your impatience because I believe we are coming now to the end of the first phase of this conflict. And in spite of all the suffering, we have so nearly succeeded.
Very importantly, the Prime Minister talking about the moment of maximum risk, and also he mentioned twice in his speech the R rate, which is of course the scientific definition of whether the infection is expanding or retracting as well. And he asked for patience, although he promised transparency. And very interestingly for the opposition, he offered them a stake in this as well. I wonder whether Sir Keir Starmer will take that as well, because of course they want to be seen to be working with the government, but also don't want to be trapped by the government's constraints. Back to you, Juliana.
Steve, thank you so much. Certainly, we'll be watching this space over the coming days. Thank you very much. All right. Well, let's take a look at U.S. futures now. How we are poised to open for Wall Street. This comes after a retreat last week for global equities. The oil price volatility, one of the key themes last week. Now this week, it is peak week for Q1 earnings. We've also got several central banks in focus. The Bank of Japan overnight announcing unprecedented easing when it comes to commitment to buying bonds. We've then got the Fed and the ECB meetings to look forward to later this week. But that's it for today's show. I'm Juliana Tattlebaum. Thanks for watching. Worldwide Exchange is coming up next.
Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong. In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history. Search Classic Game Replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime. It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on TuneIn. Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Behind the highlight reels, championship rings, and colossal paychecks, there are sports stories that fuel, deepen, and even challenge our love for the game. For true tales of underdogs, anti-heroes, and game-changing innovators, search sports documentaries on the TuneIn app.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Hey, it's Jacoby here from Jalen and Jacoby, and after you watch The Last Dance on ESPN, which you're obviously going to do just like the rest of us stuck in our homes in quarantine, you can join Jalen Rose and I for Jalen and Jacoby, The After Show. And we will be joined by the director of the documentary series, Jason Eyre, to discuss each episode in detail. You can hear our after show right here on ESPN Radio on Sunday nights after the episodes air. And they'll be available on the Jalen and Jacoby podcast feed.
Search Jalen and Jacoby to listen today.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on Tunein, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunningham to Fiala, he scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
They're telling us that we are literally helping them to save lives.
What we're trying to do is get cash in the hands of restaurant workers as soon as possible.
We're not making any profit on these. It's a complete pass-through.
It's our way to step up and support, particularly the health workers who are facing a huge crisis.
These times, you need to do what's right for society.
Everybody can do something.
Going for 4. Stock futures are higher to start what is going to be a very, very busy week here on Wall Street with a lot of corporate earnings and data as well. Oil coming crashing down again, though. It is off, and there is another bankruptcy in the oil patch to pay attention to as well. We have got all those stories, including a blockbuster report from the New York Times as well about China's efforts to cover up an initial report damaging China's response to the coronavirus outbreak. Welcome, everybody, and good morning. It is just about 5 a.m. here on a very busy Monday. Corporate earnings galore this week. All the major FANG companies, trillions of dollars worth of market cap, are set to release their numbers and, more importantly, their guidance this week. Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. I am Brian Sullivan, and we appreciate you joining us here. All right, let's talk now more about your market setup, because you've got Dow futures that are indicating a gain of about 100-plus points at the upside, around 200. As a matter of fact, stock futures are well in the green right now, this despite the fact that oil has come down significantly. The price of oil down again right now. Remember, we are in that June contract. It is off about 13% this morning, down to under $15 and change. So watch oil, and there is indeed a story in the oil patch to pay attention to as well, and that is Diamond Offshore. Diamond Offshore, which is a major oil drilling contractor, obviously like the name implies, off the coast. It is an offshore company, has indeed filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company simply not able to meet its obligations, and so Diamond Offshore has filed for bankruptcy protection. Keep an eye there on that story as well. Also, you want to watch the stock of Lowe's, L-O-E-W-S, Lowe's Corporation, Singer ticker L, not the home improvement company. Lowe's owns 53% of DO, Diamond Offshore. So keep an eye there as well. All right, well, let's take a look now, we can, at the global action in the Asian markets as well. Yeah, global stocks here. Japan, the country's central bank, pledging an unlimited government bond buying program to help shore its economy and the outbreak as well. I believe we've got a reporter on that. Do we have Matt or Juliana on that? Okay, so just there we go. Normally we do hope they're well wherever they might be as well. Why don't we get right into the guest that I do know that we have here, and that is Ben Emmons. He is Managing Director of Global Macro Strategy at Medley Global Advisors. Ben Emmons, thank you very much for joining us here on Worldwide Exchange. We appreciate it. As you see the economy and the markets right now, are there parts that look a little bit undervalued, believe it or not, and there are parts that still look overvalued to you?
Good morning, Brian. Thank you very much for having us. That's a good question, of course, as we go into earnings this week. Because, yes, you can look at the economy in two parts, right? There's a part that does really well, which is all the big tech and industries that are in demand. I think about drug retail as one example because of this environment. I would say they're not necessarily overvalued because there's a lot of demand for that services in its really fractured economy. But then you have the other part, which is the leisure, hospitality, that may start to get better in the future as we reopen the economy. I would say that's very undervalued at the moment, notwithstanding that there is, of course, stress there because of a weak economy. Nevertheless, I think there's opportunity in the future.
Where specifically are the best opportunities right now, Ben?
Well, I think that if you think about the economy in terms of what's working, what's not working, there's three groups actually. I think that the stock market has been driven by high big tech because of in-demand services. That's the strong sector. There's a sector there that, like, if you include the airlines as one example, where there's a lot of government support, and then the really weak sector that's leisure hospitality. And I do think that in the last sector, as much as that sounds strange, ultimately when the reopening happens, which is slowly on the way, there will be revival of big businesses. Take Starbucks as one example of earnings this week. You should pay attention to that because that will be one of those businesses that could see a big pickup. So I think there's where the opportunities will be in the future, and then extrapolating that out as the global economy reopens, obviously the foreign markets, there could be opportunities too.
Do you see more macro downside ahead in any specific parts of the equity market? There's a lot of calls out there, Ben, that things may still be a little bit overheated, and that what we've seen the last couple of weeks is just kind of a typical bear market bounce, that it's not going to be sustainable.
Well, that's the risk, of course, in terms of having a big contraction in the second quarter. I think everybody agrees with that goes on into the third and maybe even the fourth quarter. And we know what the reason is. We reopen the economy while we're dealing with an unpredictable virus. And, I would not be disagreeing with that per se, but it also depends upon how the reopening works state by state, part by part of the global economy too. So I think the economy stays pretty weak. We get maybe even like a form of deflation. But there is just pent-up demand. I am in that camp. Like, there is just basically let's say, a resurgence of activity, because there will be people having demand for other things than just drug retail and internet, for example. And I think that is the driver for, let's say, the rally from here.
Ben Emmons, MD Global Advisors. Ben, it was a pleasure. Thanks for kicking off our week with us. Appreciate that. All right, now to a developing story that has really captivated the world's attention. Is North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un alive? And if so, where exactly is he? Eunice Yoon is covering that story from Beijing. Good morning, Eunice.
Good morning, Brian. So Kim Jong-un has not appeared in public since April 11th. And today, South Korean and Chinese officials are trying to play down reports that he could be seriously ill, be isolating from the coronavirus, or even perhaps dead. So today, a top security advisor to the South Korean president said that their intelligence indicates that Kim is alive and well. South Korean officials have said that they are confident that Kim has been in the resort town of Wonsan since April 13th. And then separately, there were satellite images that were shown by a DC-based organization that tracks North Korea, indicating that a special train at Wonsan is there and could belong to Kim. So China's foreign ministry also weighed in, saying that it didn't have any new information to share about Kim's whereabouts. This comes after several reports that China sent in a medical team to North Korea late last week. It's unclear whether or not that medical team was meant to advise him on containing the coronavirus or to advise him on his own personal health. Brian?
Eunice, if something were to befall the dictator, do we know who would take over? Would it be his sister, or would it literally be a fight among the generals?
Well, it's difficult to say, but like you just indicated, most of the focus right now is on his younger sister. She's believed to be a couple of years younger, a very close confidant to him. She accompanied him to the two summits with President Trump. But again, one of the reasons why you could imagine that she might not get the top job is that it's a very patriarchal society and structure within the North Korean government. So there are several people who say that it could be a big free-for-all if he were to, if it turns out that he is actually dead.
Certainly a fascinating global story, one that will develop hopefully the next couple of days. Eunice Yoon in Beijing. Eunice, be well. Thank you very much. All right, we have got much to do on this very busy Monday to kick off your week. New details on just how bad the COVID-19 crisis is hitting the average American right in the wallet. Plus, a cover-up exposed that you've got to hear about. How government leaders in Europe are bowing to Chinese pressure to soften reports over their initial handling of the pandemic and what is actually being reported. And later on, a new warning from Goldman Sachs. We have got a very busy hour still ahead. You're watching Worldwide Exchange, and we're back on Cnbc right after this.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history. Search Classic Game Replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime. It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on TuneIn.
Did you know TuneIn doesn't just live here on your smart speaker? From the audio that moves you to the audio that gets you moving. Soundtrack your every movement with the free TuneIn app. Available on your phone or tablet. Download TuneIn from the App Store today.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
The Mina Kimes Show podcast.
Kevin Clark.
If Josh Allen became the 10th best quarterback in football this year, they'd probably win 14 games. Am I wrong about that?
No. If you as a quarterback can't win in the Bills' situation right now, they should not extend you. So many teams, Jets, do not have the information they need to evaluate their quarterbacks based on the teams they built around. The Bills do.
Listen and subscribe to the Mina Kimes Show podcast.
Search the Mina Kimes Show to listen.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 ball games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
Pass to the 5, touchdown!
Search classic game replays to listen for...
It's going to be a gigantic week of corporate earnings. 142 companies are set to release their numbers, and though nobody's going to be looking backwards, they will look forwards. It is any kind of guidance that corporate America can provide that is going to be key for investors this week. So there's some of the companies set to release their numbers. All right, let's move on now to our guest, Mark Hamrick. And of course, the pandemic and lockdown is likely taking a mental toll on many of us. Well, a new study shows that it is also taking a toll economically, even for those who are still working. For more, we are joined now by Mark Hamrick. He is Bankrate Senior Economic Analyst. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. What does your study suggest about how collectively as Americans we are feeling about our finances right now?
Good morning, Brian. Thanks for having me. Well, I think across the board what we find is a moderate to extreme concern about the state of individuals' household finances, whether it's the ability to pay bills, about job security, the value of investments. And obviously, these are all elevated since before the crisis. In some cases, we found that the CARES Act has helped to, let's say, limit some of this concern, but we're talking about a majority of Americans who have these concerns either at a moderate or extreme level. So obviously, it's quite pervasive.
Yeah, and what is the single biggest concern? Is it simply the ability to pay down their obligations, losing their job? What is it?
Yeah, well, basically, I would say they're almost all extremely high. So if we look at the number one concern in terms of the percentage of Americans expressing that, it really is job security or the reliability of income. And then after that, the ability to pay bills, just getting by, taking care of the basics. And then third on the list is the value of investments. But nevertheless, all these are elevated, Brian.
There's one thing, though, that is a little bit sensitive, I think, to talk about, Mark. But the one, everyone's doing Zooms and talking on the phones. The one thing that I do hear from a lot of people, again, just anecdotally talking to, is that they're also saving a lot of money. They're not commuting. They're not going out to eat. There's no discretionary travel. It's almost like, yes, there are economic worries, but at the same time, everybody I know is like, man, I'm saving $500 a month in New Jersey Transit train fees. Is there any gauge on sort of how much more we might collectively be saving as well? Because we're not doing anything.
Right. Well, I suppose if you were to look at the data and say for a decline in retail sales, obviously that is money that was not spent at retail. We'll obviously get a closer look at the actual consumer spending figures as we proceed in the calendar. It's important to remember, though, Brian, that we're talking about the likelihood that unemployment in the country is getting very close to the 20% level. So it is true that people who the likes of us, thank God for that, are still gainfully employed. But for all those out there that had not sufficiently saved in the first place and now find that living paycheck to paycheck wasn't a very sustainable strategy now that income has been taken away.
Do we have any idea what kind of gap unemployment, along with that $600 sweetener that Congress threw in, will make up for that here? The folks that unfortunately have lost their job, if it is temporary, will they be made at least partly whole?
Well, obviously somewhat, but another question we asked in the survey was really political in a sense, and that was with respect to your personal finances, do you think Washington needs to do more? And nearly 6 out of 10 said yes. 32% said that Washington has done enough, and 11% said it's done too much. Interestingly enough, this broke down along party lines where Democrats tended to say that Washington needs to do more and Republicans not as often. But I think probably what they're looking for there is something to plug that gap of income that you referred to.
Yeah, it certainly is the greatest economic story of the last decade, if not the last century. Mark Hamrick of Bankrate, thank you very much for joining us, Mark. Appreciate it. You and yours be well. All right, on deck, a closer look at the challenges facing Main Street, something that we just talked about as some states begin the very slow process of trying to reopen their economies. We're going to speak with 2 small business owners who are right on the front lines.
Today's big number, $3.8 trillion. That's the combined market capitalization of Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon, the S&P 500's biggest companies, and 16% of the S&P's total market cap. All 3 report quarterly earnings this week.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on Tunein, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
In case you didn't know, Tunein lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with Tunein.
While you wait for baseball season to begin, Tunein has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history. Search Classic Game Replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime. It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on Tunein.
How do you keep track of all your favorite stations and podcasts? Easy. You add them to your favorites list. Just find the audio you want to bookmark and tap the heart icon. Then whenever you want to browse your favorites, you'll find everything under the Favorites tab.
You love Tunein for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on Tunein.
They say singing can help you remember things, so here's some tips for parents out there during these tough times.
Number 1. Make sure your kids wash their hands for 20 seconds after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside. 2. Virtual play dates. Social and physical distancing can help save lives. 3. Tell them they're safe and show your love and pride. Yes, we'll get through this together.
Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Not all heroes wear capes, but most wear tights.
And here we go, now it's underway. Cover on Rowan, wins.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the Tunein podcast. For expert analysis of the latest WrestleMania, turn on the WWE podcast. Or listen to the Steve Austin Show for no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities.
It's good to be here tonight. It's an empty building.
For these and more, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
All right, welcome back. Unfortunately, there is yet another headache today for beaten up Boeing. The company is being accused by Brazil's Embraer of wrongfully terminating a $4 billion deal for its commercial jet units, a tie-up. Boeing letting the weekend deadline expire, simply citing the inability to agree on final terms. Embraer is now accusing Boeing of acting in bad faith negotiations. Most analysts believe that Boeing's need to conserve cash due to the collapse in demand for planes is the real reason that the deal was put off. All right, well, if you missed this blockbuster story in the New York Times over the weekend, we urge you to go back and read it. The feature details how the EU officials bowed to pressure from China over its handling over the pandemic, including scrubbing key details of the origins of the virus, covering up China's efforts to convince people that the virus may have originated with American soldiers, and other disinformation campaigns to spin key facts. Joining us now is the author of that report, Matt Apuzzo, joining us live from Brussels. Matt, really appreciate you joining us here on Worldwide Exchange. I read your piece over the weekend. We immediately reached out. I mean, the first thought that came to my mind when I read it was Watergate, but perhaps on a larger scale. What has been the reaction to your piece so far?
Well, I mean, the European Union is obviously pushing back, and they're saying we didn't edit anything in response to Chinese pushback. This is just the sort of normal kind of editing process we go through. What's really remarkable here is that this is a fight over a pretty boring document. Every month or so, the EU have actually a pretty cool program where EU analysts go out and they find disinformation, state-sponsored disinformation, and they flag it so that there's some sort of place people can go and say, oh, wait, that's not real. That's fake news. And as part of that, they issue these updates. And one of the updates that was supposed to come early last week was going to have some pretty harsh words for Russia and China for their disinformation around COVID-19. And when word got out that one was coming, China reacted very swiftly and pushed back very hard on their diplomats, EU diplomats in Beijing. And we were able to get a hold of some internal correspondence inside the European Union officials here in Brussels that showed that the reaction in Brussels was, let's make changes. This is pretty controversial. And they just sort of subtly tamped down and toned down the language.
And that, you feel, based on what you've seen, was directly due to response, either economically, politically, or whatever, Matt, from the Chinese government.
Well, I've seen some of the cables that came out of Beijing, and the Chinese didn't threaten anything explicitly. They said, look, this wouldn't be good for our relationship. And obviously the EU is a major trading partner with China, and there's a lot of trade money at stake once COVID is passed. So there wasn't like a threat. And they did publish their report, and it still mentioned China. It was just toned down just a little bit in key places. And rather than focusing on just China and Russia, it became kind of like, well, it's a worldwide look, and China was put near the bottom. And so the EU's right. Yeah, we called out China, but also at the same time, it allows you to see the effects of pressure when, diplomats and national governments put pressure on institutions just to soften their tone.
Yeah, and every day it feels like, Matt, through your agency, New York Times, and others, we are getting more details out about China's cover-up in this. Certainly, and part of your reporting, which the New York Times reported back in March 13th, was that apparently certain media outlets in China were trying to spin the idea to their own domestic population that coronavirus was spread by American soldiers, that we were responsible in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, what you're seeing here is, it's important to remember that early on in December of 2019, as this outbreak was really taking hold in China, the Chinese government tried to tamp things down and tried to suppress doctors and downplay this. And we really lost several key weeks as a human race. We lost a key month because of that. The Chinese government is really trying to move the conversation past that and move them towards a conversation about the really important research that Chinese scientists have contributed to COVID-19 and all of the masks and equipment that the Chinese government has donated. So what you're seeing is part of this effort to say, hey, let's not talk so much about December. Let's talk much more about what we're doing now and reframe China's role in this as a global leader rather than one of the responsible parties.
Matt Apuzzo of the New York Times, I retweeted your piece. Urge everybody to go back over the weekend if they haven't and read that. Matt Apuzzo, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Be well.
Thanks a lot. You too.
All right, when we come back here on CNBC on a Monday morning, round 2 of Washington's small business loan program kicking off today, but some 11th hour changes could make it harder for banks to lend. We'll dig in why. But first, Starbucks, despite its woes there, striking a big deal in China with venture capital firm Sequoia Capital. Despite the pandemic crushing that company's economy, Starbucks wants to keep growing there. We'll tell you why. CNBC is back right after this.
You love Tunein for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on Tunein.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn. How do you keep track of all your favorite stations and podcasts? Easy. You add them to your favorites list. Just find the audio you want to bookmark and tap the heart icon. Then whenever you want to browse your favorites, you'll find everything under the Favorites tab.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on Tunein, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunnin to Fiala, he scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic game replays to start listening.
The right time with Bomani Jones.
While he was gone, Al had some kind of vote to make him the managing. You remember, he used to come up all the time in the Raiders game that he was the managing general partner. By the way, don't forget, there was a lot going on in Munich. But you know how tired that man was to come back and find out that Al Davis had strong-armed his team from him while he was gone?
Search the right time with Bomani Jones to listen.
While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history.
There it goes, 3-2 pitches, hit in the air and hit well. Center field, Bader back, at the wall, it's gone!
Search classic game replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime.
Ground ball out to Jackie Robinson, up with it, over to Reese for one, back to Hodges, it gets away from him, Barra's trying to go to second.
It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on TuneIn.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly
Again, with another big bankruptcy being filed, stock futures, though, they're shrugging it off, and they are indeed higher. Dow futures indicating an open of about 200 points. All right, new worries for the $370 billion in fresh small business aid before it even becomes available. We are speaking with 2 small business owners who are given the green light to reopen, but will they? And one top bank out with a new warning about a troubling signal that the S&P 500 might be sending you. It is Monday, April 27th, 2020, and Worldwide Exchange on CNBC rolls on right now. And welcome back and good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. I am Brian Sullivan. Thank you very much for starting your week with us here on CNBC. Well, we begin this morning with some breaking news. The stock looks to extend their winning streak to 4 sessions in a row. Right now, Dow futures indicate that we might just do that. In fact, they are higher, indicating an open with about a jump of 200 points on the Dow. All of this as investors brace for the busiest week of corporate results and, more importantly, guidance on what comes now and what comes next. In all this week, 142 companies will open up their books and hopefully give us a little bit of guidance as to what they see down the road. Oil, of course, remains a massive story for your money. And as each day creeps by and as we get closer to maxing out global storage, prices continue to be under pressure. And right now, oil is down again about 13%, and the crunch claiming another company. Offshore driller Diamond Offshore says it has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company recently skipped an interest payment to bondholders, beginning a 30-day clock to either pay up or default. The company blaming a, quote, unprecedented impact from the oil price war. And you also want to watch here shares of Loews Corp, L-O-E-W-S, ticker L. They own about 53% of Diamond Offshore. By the way, I've got a new piece up on CNBC.com right now about how oil's Shawshank redemption moment is upon us right now and what it needs to do to prevent the possibility of negative prices happening, because they very well could. Check that article out after the show. All right, there is your morning stock setup, but let's be clear. Right now, the data shows one thing: cash is king. Check out these remarkable stats about where people are putting their money, and it all comes from fund tracking firm EPFR Global. Last week, stock funds lost just over $7 billion. They were pulled out. In other words, people took out $7 billion from their stock investments. Much of that money, perhaps, went to bond funds. Bond funds had inflows of nearly $11 billion. Hedge funds took in just over $1 billion, despite some spotty returns lately. But look at this. Money market funds, effectively cash equivalents, had 126 billion of inflows just last week. Investors like you are nervous, and you're selling stocks and parking your cash in cash. Going to try to bring this important data each week. Wow, 126 billion in cash inflows. Says a lot. All right, let's move on to the state of small business. The Paycheck Protection Program is set to be up and running later on this morning, giving small businesses access to $310 billion in fresh aid from Congress. There is, though, one problem. The money could already be fully tapped out even before it's begin to be lent. Speaking yesterday, Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan called on Congress to fully fund that program.
I think it's clear that between Congress and the administration and American people, we need to get all these funded and not make this a foot race. Just get the work done and get everybody through.
All right, let's get more now on this important story. Kate Rogers joining us now with exactly where we stand. Good morning, Kate.
Hi, Brian. Good morning to you. Well, the SBA says that as of 10:30 a.m. Eastern this morning, E-Tran will open back up and small businesses can start to submit their applications for this second wave of $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program. But the Consumer Bankers Association has warned that the money already may be spoken for before this even gets up and running, and that's due to very high demand. Remember, there are 30 million small businesses in this country. Estimates have been as high as nearly $2 trillion for what might be needed to actually help many of them in this time. Now, last time around, remember, 1.6 million loans ate up the first $350 billion of funding in less than 2 weeks. Some banks like Wells Fargo have said that businesses who were already in the queue will hold their places in line. But JP Morgan Chase has warned that some businesses that the money will go quickly, and if they are still in the early phases of applying, they may want to seek out another lender. Also, the government out with warnings last week seeking to limit virus aid to larger companies who applied last time, saying that borrowers now must certify that this crisis makes the loan necessary and that they cannot access other forms of capital. Friday guidance also said that both hedge funds and private equity firms are not eligible for this aid. This is the wave of companies returning cash continues on, with Shake Shack, Ruth's Chris, and AutoNation and Potbelly all returning or canceling loans, for a grand total of more than $100 million back over to the PPP fund. Brian, back over to you.
A couple of follow-up questions for you here. Number one, we're getting a bunch of 11th hour changes from the program from Washington. One of those is capping the maximum amount that each bank can lend at about 10% or $60 billion per bank. Comment on that. Also, more reports this weekend that a couple hundred now publicly traded larger companies have applied for more than $850 million in loans despite the blowback about public companies or bigger companies doing that. Address both.
Sure, Brian. So we'll start with the lending cap. The SBA sent out a memo yesterday basically saying that this is prudent and reasonable to cap that at about 10% of funding or $60 billion per lending institution, just because demand is expected to be so high. And banks can submit a minimum of 15,000 applications in a bulk submission to E-Tran. So we'll have to see how that's able to be processed this morning. It remains to be seen if E-Tran will work smoothly. There were reports last time that this suffered outages, because demand was so high. So that's certainly something we're going to keep an eye on today. And then with regard to a lot of these publicly traded companies now, coming out that they did apply for this program, we did hear from the government last week really saying you have to say this crisis made this loan necessary, and you have to prove that, you couldn't access other forms of capital here. And so now you're starting to see more and more companies say that they're going to either return these loans or cancel them. That will give money back to the fund. But really think about how many small businesses could have accessed, that $100 billion or so last time around. So I think that's an important distinction too. More may return the funds. We'll definitely keep an eye on that as well.
Yeah, this is a massive story. You've been all over it. Kate Rogers, good to see you. Thank you very much. All right, well, as round two of the PPP begins its rollout, as Kate just noted, investor attention continues to focus more on Main Street and the countless small business owners that are struggling through all the lockdowns and stay-at-home orders. All of this as New York unveils its plan to begin slowly reopening the state as of May 15th. And perhaps the brightest spotlights right now are two states that are already starting to do that. That is Georgia and that is Colorado. Georgia beginning today allowing restaurants to resume dine-in service, and movie theaters can once again welcome the public inside the theater after Friday's phase one that allows salons, tattoo parlors, gyms, and bowling alleys to resume operations. Meantime, in Colorado, today begins what the governor there calls safer at home, or a dialed back stay-at-home order where retail businesses are allowed to reopen, albeit with curbside pickup. So what do these various phased reopenings look like on the ground from the point of the people who actually run these business? Well, let's speak with two of them. Joining us now are two companies in Georgia and in Colorado. Vince Villavalzo is the owner of the Mystic Owl Tattoo located in Marietta, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. And Frank Bonanno is the proprietor of Bonanno Concept, a restaurant group with 10 locations in and around the Denver area. Vince, we're going to begin with you. You have the ability at your tattoo parlor to open up. You have chosen not to. Why?
Feels safe that it's open. I think it's way too early to go back to work. On a normal basis, we need PPE, personal protective equipment, to perform our job. However, we have to escalate the measures to meet what the situation is calling for. As we all know, there's shortages on materials and masks and all these things that the medical field needs. And we feel it's highly unethical for us just to try to find those items over the medical field. So that for us, it's very important that our staff and our clients and ourselves are safe. At this point, we cannot get the right equipment, and even if we could, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think it's the ethical thing to do. We received a number of emails trying to sell us equipment.
Let me jump in
Sure.
here if I can. You obviously would wear masks and gloves anyway, doing what you do as a tattoo artist. So we respect that decision. You don't want to go after the stuff that the first responders need. What about the businesses around you? I'm sure there are small businesses all around you. What are they doing? What are the other owners that you're speaking with saying?
Well, owners that I know, some of their because this whole thing is confusing. There's a lot of contradicting information. we're supposed to meet certain guidelines. Some of them are opening, some of them are not. Some of them are trying to follow the guidelines. We try to find sources from the CDC, from the health department locally. The fact is that the kind of business that a lot of people have, which is, barbershops, martial arts, tattoo studios, massage parlors, things like that, you need to be close contact with clients to be able to perform your job and give a service. So to me, it's a very hard thing to give somebody a tattoo without touching them or being in close quarters with them. So that whole interaction becomes very, very confusing when not having the proper equipment. So I think a lot of people are in the same situation where either, they're very hard to one side or the other. Some people think this is not real. Some people think they're just going to open and go about their lives. In our case,
it is.
Go ahead.
It is very real, Vince. It is very real, Vince. And your employees, it's real in the community. It's real on Georgia. And you guys are conducting a bit of an experiment that the rest of the country is watching. And everybody out there hoping that that experiment turns out better than people think that it might. Vince Villavalzo of Mystic Owl Tattoo doing some beautiful work there, Vince. We look forward to reopening. Let us know when you do. Thank you very much. Best to you and yours.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Now let's move on to Colorado, where they also are beginning the long road of trying to reopen today. And Bonanno Concepts proprietor Frank Bonanno owns 10 restaurants in and around the Denver area. And he joins us very early his time, Frank. But we do appreciate it because this is the business of America is business, and small business in particular. So we appreciate you joining us. Obviously, the majority of your restaurants are closed. Some are offering takeout. What are you going to be able to do this week? What changes for your restaurants and your workers?
Well, I think the restaurant industry itself is going to be changing dramatically. I don't think we're going to be like we were. I mean, this week we are still waiting to hear if we are going to be opening May 15th. That's one of the things we're struggling with. And also what the rules are going to be when we reopen, because it is very difficult to serve someone from 6 feet away in the restaurant business. So we're still kind of waiting to hear what the rules will be when we reopen. But we are doing to-go and trying to make a go of it in a couple of restaurants.
And how have to-go orders, what percentage basically of the revenue is that make? I've spoken with restaurant owners in my town here in New Jersey. Some are saying we're at 10%. Some are saying we're at 80 or 90% if they don't have a bar business, because there's a lot of BYO in New Jersey. What kind of revenue streams are you seeing right now with the current situation?
It's we're doing about 5% of the business we used to do. So, and Milk Market, probably about 3% of what we used to do. So we're just trying to get through this and set up a goal and try and realize what it is we're going to be doing when we move forward and reopen a business that's going to be substantially different than it was before.
And would that be, Frank, I would imagine removing half the tops, half the tables, spacing people out farther apart? Have you heard from longtime customers that are saying, yeah, we'll come right back out? Do you think people are going to be tentative to come back out, regardless of how you adjust the physical space?
Well, I think adjusting the physical space is definitely one thing we're going to do. We do not know what our spacing is going to be as per Colorado, as per the Denver law. One of our restaurants has already had a tremendous amount of people inquiring about getting in for reservations. That's a very small restaurant. We only seat about 55 people there. It's a higher end restaurant, Mizuna. But our bigger restaurants that seat 200 people or 150 people, those, at 50% capacity, 50% of the revenue, that's going to be really difficult. We're not going to need the same amount of employees, and with the PPP, you're expected to employ the same amount of people. We're expected to employ people right now, and we don't even know when we're going to be open. So it's very difficult to even get a handle on the PPP money.
Yeah. And let me ask you a difficult question, Frank, because there's an article in the Journal about this. There's a number of NPR did an article about this, that some employees, some employers are concerned they may not be able to get employees back even when they want to, simply because with some of the programs, the $600 sweetener, it may be tough to lure, employees off of the current unemployment program simply because they're afraid to come back to work. Their health and safety are at risk, and their income is at least being subsidized in part. It's a tough story, but it's out there in the Journal. It's out there at NPR. What are you hearing and seeing?
That's the reality right now. There are people that are making more money staying home because with the subsidies from the state they can make more money than they were making with their unemployment. But we have to totally respect them for being safe. I mean, that is one of our biggest concerns with reopening is employee safety and customer safety. But you need your employees to feel good about what it is they're doing. We're in the hospitality business, and if you're not loving what you're doing, and that is what we do, is give hospitality and customer service. And if they're not comfortable with that, I don't know that you really want them in the restaurant. So it's a very, very difficult road right now.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's a sticky road. It's a tough road. People just want to be safe for their families. Nobody can blame them at all, certainly for that. And Frank, I look forward to reopening as well. I've actually eaten in Mizuna, so I look forward to that. And French 75 and the other ones reopening in the great city of Denver. Thank you for joining us very early out there in Colorado. Best to you, Frank. Stay in touch. Thank you. All right, coming up, the new concerns surrounding this country's meat supply as coronavirus hits yet another production facility. But first, shares of Airbus, they are lower this morning. The company CEO revealing it is just bleeding cash at an unprecedented speed. According to reports, he told workers in a letter to brace for potentially deep job cuts, warning that Airbus's very survival is at stake. More on that. Dow futures up 200, oil down 12%, and we are back with more on CNBC right after this.
You love Tunein for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on Tunein.
Behind the highlight reels, championship rings, and colossal paychecks, there are sports stories that fuel, deepen, and even challenge our love for the game. For true tales of underdogs, anti-heroes, and game-changing innovators, search sports documentaries on the Tunein app.
Get the latest breaking news alerts and listening suggestions for new stations and podcasts. Let TuneIn keep you in the loop with push notifications. Just go to your device's settings and allow push notifications from TuneIn to get live alerts and recommendations on the audio you want to know about. In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
Hey, it's Jacoby here from Jalen and Jacoby. And after you watch The Last Dance on ESPN, which you're obviously going to do just like the rest of us stuck in our homes in quarantine, you can join Jalen Rose and I for Jalen and Jacoby, The After Show. And we will be joined by the director of the documentary series, Jason Eyre, to discuss each episode in detail. You can hear our After Show right here on ESPN Radio on Sunday nights after the episodes air. And they'll be available on the Jalen and Jacoby podcast feed.
Search Jalen and Jacoby to listen today.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history.
There goes 3-2 pitches, hit in the air and hit well. Center field, Bader back at the wall. It's gone!
All right, welcome back and good Monday morning. It is 5:47 here on a Monday. There's a shot of Times Square. A little bit different, obviously, than it looked just even a couple of months ago. Look forward to filling that place back up. Well, meantime, we can't do that until this comes down. The number of coronavirus cases in the United States simply continues to grow, nearing the 1 million mark as the death toll approaches 55,000 souls. Global health officials are now expressing some new concerns regarding recovered patients. Rahel Solomon back at Cnbc HQ with the latest. Rahel.
Hi, Brian. So the World Health Organization is warning that people who have already had coronavirus are not immune from getting it again. That warning comes as governments around the world map out plans to reopen, as we just heard in the show in the last block. So the WHO says that the idea that one-time infection can lead to immunity remains unproven and is unreliable. The world's top meat company is shuttering another one of its production facilities, adding to supply concerns. JBS SA is making that move following an outbreak of coronavirus in the community near the Wisconsin beef plant. So that's adding fuel to a potential meat shortage, with 25% of the U.S.'s pork capacity and 10% of U.S. beef output offline. And the NBA is taking its first steps towards potentially resuming operations. The league on Friday reopened team practice facilities in areas that have loosened stay-at-home restrictions. Players, meantime, can return as soon as this week. Meanwhile, Formula One announcing this morning that it expects to start its season in Austria the weekend of July 4th. Brian, that will be without spectators. I'll send it back to you.
Yeah, we may have sports on TV, Rahel, but a long time before we're all together again in some kind of a stadium format.
Seems
Rahel,
that way.
thank you very much.
Sure.
All right. On deck, stocks, the markets, and your money look to open their week higher. Dow futures, they're up 200 points right now, and Citigroup's Stephen Whiting will break down where he and his team are seeing opportunity in the markets right now. Of course, as a reminder, you can always watch us live on the go from anywhere, although where are we going? You can download the CNBC app and check it out. We're back with more Worldwide Exchange right after this.
If you've used TuneIn much, you probably already know how to favorite your top stations and podcasts for quick access. But did you know you can organize your favorites too? Under your favorites page on the TuneIn app, hold and drag the stations to rearrange the order to your liking. It's that easy.
You have no lights, no refrigeration, no heating or air conditioning. Your well or sump pump won't work. Your modern daily electronics are rendered useless. And what if the power's out for days or weeks? Are you prepared? You can be with a Generac home standby generator.
24 days we were without power. I had water, I had ice, I had coffee, I had air conditioner. I was able to stay here because of Generac.
When an outage occurs, your Generac home standby generator automatically powers up, so your life goes on without disruption. You and your family are comfortable, safe, and secure. Generac generators run on your home's existing natural gas or propane. And Generac's standard Mobile Link remote monitoring system keeps you posted on operating status, maintenance updates, and more. Generac generators are designed, engineered, and purpose-built in the USA. Generac is the #1 manufacturer of home standby generators in the world. 8 out of 10 home generators are Generac, with thousands of satisfied customers.
Very good product. Very, very good reviews from everybody.
Prices start at just $19.99, and special financing is available with surprisingly affordable monthly payments. Call now to schedule your free in-home assessment with one of Generac's 6,000 nationwide dealers. The call is free, the assessment is free, and there's no obligation to buy. Plus, if you act now, you'll receive a 7-year extended warranty absolutely free. That's a $695 value. Call now, so the next time there's a power outage, your home powers up. Power your life with Generac. Call or go online to schedule your free in-home assessment today.
All right, welcome back in. Good morning. Well, earnings season, for what it's going to be worth, kicking into high gear this week with a lot of big names. You've got 3M, Starbucks, Ford, and Google all reporting their numbers. And that is just tomorrow's results. 142 of the S&P 500 will release their figures. Very few people are going to be looking at the earnings. More importantly, looking for any clue, glimmer of guidance about what these companies see ahead. Well, investors are certainly going to have plenty more to chew on as well. You've got first quarter GDP data out this week. You've got the FOMC meeting on Wednesday with, of course, an unprecedentedly large balance sheet, one that is growing as well. You've got a news conference with Fed Chair Jay Powell. That could be the most watched in years. Annual sales data, see how car dealers are doing. Even with the pandemic raging on, apparently people are still buying cars. We've got annual meetings from Boeing and Berkshire Hathaway as well. It is going to be a very busy week. on many, many levels. All right, well, we begin this morning with breaking news. By the way, let's talk about the stock market looking to do 4 sessions in a row of gains. Dow futures, they are higher right now, despite the fact that crude oil is down about 12 or 13%. So you want to watch oil. It is off. And by the way, there was another bankruptcy in the oil patch. Offshore driller Diamond Offshore announcing its intention to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. They're simply too much debt load and facing what they call an unprecedented hit because of the oil price collapse as well. Also watch shares of Lowe's, which is ticker LOEWS. They own 53% of Diamond Offshore. All right, let's go back to the markets and get your setup now. Stephen Whiting of Citi Private Bank joining us now. Stephen, good to chat with you again. Good morning, I think. How do you and your team sort of see the markets right now with just unprecedented amounts of lack of visibility upon us?
Well, look, I think the question that we pose is this the right time and is it the right price? And in terms of timing, the fact that equity markets typically rise 6 months before fundamentals turn is essentially right on time. If you take a look back at 2008, for example, where there were 2 roughly 20% rallies that gave way to new all-time lows, that was, again, well ahead of the actual bottom in the economy. We had a second half 2009 recovery. By the time we got to March, we had enough visibility that the economy would turn in a few months' time. We take a look at it now. I mean, there are different paths you can imagine for COVID in the economy, but it seems very likely that 6 months from now, in fact, the third quarter of this year, activity will be somewhat higher than it is in the second quarter. So the timing is just right. Now, the question is, did we fall enough? We're falling 35% at the absolute low. And we think that earnings per share for S&P companies, for example, will be down more than 60% in the second quarter of the year. But if you take a look at the composition of the market, the U.S. market is really driven by digital services, whether that's in technology. It's driven by healthcare, staples, more than any other market. What we think that there actually is an opportunity here is for laggard sectors like small caps in the next year and a half, again, to have a much stronger return. So the one thing, again, that you could probably do is if you have a bit of patience, we think that just being in the most defensive, the best positioned sectors, it's probably enough time enough now, to take a little bit, of an asset allocation and take it and put it in some of those places.
Okay, we got about a minute left of the show. We had a data point earlier in the show, Stephen, $126 billion going to money market funds, basically cash, last week. At some point, that cash will have to be reallocated, and you think it will go to stocks?
Yeah, look, I think you can't bounce back when you haven't dropped. So I think it is going to be, again, in some of the catching up sectors. But you've been talking about oil. There's a place where, again, we'd want to stay with the highest quality producers, the highest quality securities, because of the really concentrated hit to that one sector.
Yeah. Okay, Stephen Whiting, Citi Private Bank. Stephen, always great to chat with you again. Thank you very much for joining us here on Worldwide Exchange. We've got to leave it there, folks. And we're going to leave you with the market in the green, at least for stock futures. They're up to 80. Oil, though, down nearly 15%. We'll see you tomorrow right here on Worldwide Exchange. Squawk Box picks it up right up.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on Tunein, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening. While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history. Search Classic Game Replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime. It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Hey, it's Jacoby here from Jalen and Jacoby, and after you watch The Last Dance on ESPN, which you're obviously going to do just like the rest of us stuck in our homes in quarantine, you can join Jalen Rose and I for Jalen and Jacoby, The After Show. And we will be joined by the director of the documentary series, Jason Eyre, to discuss each episode in detail. You can hear our after show right here on ESPN Radio on Sunday nights after the episodes air. And they'll be available on the Jalen and Jacoby podcast feed.
Search Jalen and Jacoby to listen today.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
While he was gone, Al had some kind of vote to make him the managing. You remember he used to come up all the time in the Raiders game that he was the managing general partner. By the way, don't forget, there was a lot going on in Munich. You know how tired that man was?
On Squawk Box, breaking news, investor impact, the volatile markets, pandemic outlook, the crude crash.
Just out of the realm of anything we've ever seen.
Continuing coverage on Squawk Box. Watch and listen live on the Cnbc app.
I've got an offer for you.
Wow.
There's only one Dame and John.
Riding all the way to the bank, baby.
Shark Tank, tonight starting at 8 Eastern. CnbC, get yours.
Where do we stand? The markets, the impact on startups, travel, oil.
We just heard the latest numbers on COVID-19.
And the virus. Squawk Alley, 11 a.m. Eastern today. Watch and listen live on the CNBC app.
Good morning. Futures pointing to a solidly higher open this morning as we prepare for the busiest week of earnings season. That guy looks bad. Prices are set to tumble. In fact, I don't know why we're talking about that. It's set to tumble. Oil prices are down. Crash has taken a familiar name in the energy sector, taken out one of those. Details straight ahead. Plus, we're going to talk to Dr. Scott Gottlieb. All the states, or some of the states, about to begin the first phase of reopening this week. Monday, April 27, 2020, and Squawk Box begins right now.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box here on CNBC. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin. We do have a big lineup of guests today, starting in just a few minutes with the latest on the pandemic from Dr. Scott Gottlieb. And later, Fanatics Executive Chairman Michael Rubin will join us. Also, Mohammed El-Arian, New York Times columnist Tom Friedman, Kevin Hassett, advisor to President Trump, and New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. All of those names to get to coming up. But first, let's start with the markets this morning. If you've been watching the U.S. equity futures, things are looking higher this morning. Right now, it looks like the Dow is indicated up by almost 250 points. S&P is up by about 30 points. The NASDAQ up by 111. Last week was the first down week we'd seen for the markets in 3 weeks. But if we see gains from the markets today, the Dow like it is up right now, that would be the fourth day in a row of gains that we're seeing for the Dow. And that's the first time that's happened since all the way back to February. Been some significant builds that we've seen happening. This is all happening despite crude oil prices, which we'll look at in just a moment. But the Treasury, meantime, shows you that the 10-year is yielding 0.627%. And then there are crude oil prices, which generally when we've seen pressure on crude oil prices, that's put pressure on equities as well. That's not the case this morning, but WTI is indicated down by just over 15%. That's a decline of $2.66 to $14.28 a barrel. Brent crude down by just 3.3%. It's now trading at $20.73. Andrew?
Meantime, an update now on the pandemic and the numbers that we bring you every morning about where we stand. Here's where we do stand. Global cases now are at 2.9 million. To put that in perspective, cases in the United States are at 965,000, closing in on 1 million. 288,000 of those cases are from New York State, with another 109,000 of them in the neighboring New Jersey. Yesterday, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo outlined the state's plans to reopen its economy in phases beginning on May 15th. Now, the first phase involves construction and manufacturing. The second phase includes businesses opening with social distancing practices and with personal protective equipment available. Daily hospitalizations in the state have seen a choppy decline so far since the first week in April. And one of the things that the governor's talked about is waiting until those numbers become less choppy. As Becky mentioned, we're going to get an update on where things stand in New Jersey and from the plan there from the governor, Phil Murphy. And that's going to happen in the 8 o'clock hour, an interview and conversation you do not want to miss. Joe.
Thanks, Andrew. White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett's going to be on the show also. But he warned yesterday unemployment levels could hit levels not seen since the Great Depression. Speaking to reporters on the White House lawn, he said the unemployment rate could hit 16%, warned that the next couple of months are going to be terrible for economic data, and that's at 8 a.m. Eastern is when we will speak to Kevin Hassett, who's back. He's come on quite a bit. He left for a while now. He's a an economic advisor, a pretty senior one at the White House back.
All right, Joe, thank you. On this week's agenda, we also have the busiest week for corporate results and, more importantly, guidance on what's going to be coming next. 142 of the S&P 500 companies will open up their books this week. We'll be hearing from 12 Dow components, including Caterpillar, 3M, Microsoft, Apple, and Boeing. And again, Joe, it's really not what we're hearing about the current quarter, but what they see, what they're anticipating, and what's happening right now in this month of April as well.
And life and corporate maneuvering goes on, especially speaking of Boeing, Becky. I love those little Embraer jets that are flying all the time on the short flights that we see, and that was a key part of Boeing's strategy. So we'll see. But in addition to the first quarter results, Boeing's going to also hold its annual meeting and face the application deadline for a multi-billion-dollar aid package from federal government. And what I'm talking about today, the company is being accused by Brazil's Embraer of wrongfully terminating a $4 billion deal for that company's commercial jet business. Boeing allowed a weekend deadline to expire, citing inability to agree on final terms. That's part of Boeing's strategy previously. Embraer is now accusing Boeing of acting in bad faith in the negotiations. Obviously, Boeing needs to conserve cash due to the collapse in demand for planes. That's the real reason that the deal was killed. And I'm sure, Andrew and Beck, you've both been on these little Embraer jets. There's one seat on the left, two seats on the right. Easy on, easy off. I never feel like, I'm on that small of a jet. You do? I like them. I like them. Easy on, easy.
I hate them because
because you know you're on a jet. You're on a jet. You like about 15 seats across.
Takeoffs and landings. Yeah, takeoffs and landings, if you're in the back of the plane, it's an issue if you get motion sickness.
Yeah, Andrew, if you're not in the front of the plane, it doesn't matter on those because there is no front of the plane. So you don't have that stigma. You know what I mean?
It does matter. I don't throw up in the front of the plane. All the seats are the same, but I don't throw up in the front of the plane. When I'm in the back of the plane.
Did you throw up walking to sit down today? And it doesn't take much for you, does it? To jostle you?
It doesn't take much.
Well, every time you're on a helicopter,
bigger planes are
you've
better.
Thrown up. You get car sick.
One time I didn't throw up on a helicopter. Twice I didn't throw up on a helicopter. I didn't throw up when I got shot off of an aircraft carrier. I did fine on that.
Really? See, I would have.
Yeah.
Why? Because you were.
I was too scared to.
You were faint. Yeah, you had fainted already, so you were unable to.
Right. Probably.
Anyway, I like them. I think loading one of those wide-body jets is like, are we there yet? No, you're almost on the plane though. Anyway, go ahead, Andrew.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Joe. And I will say, I don't know if Becky's tried this. I kind of think you might not do well with ludicrous mode on Tesla, which is the segue I'm going to use to get to this next Tesla story. Not. But Becky, have you been on ludicrous mode on a Tesla yet?
I haven't. Have you done it?
I don't. I have, and I almost threw up. So I'm thinking, it's fast. Anyway. We do have some Tesla news, and actually Tesla mixed with COVID news of sorts. A little bit about reopening and getting back to business, and some of the trials and tribulations and conundrums that it creates, if you will. Tesla management now asking dozens of employees to return to work. They're asking them to do that on Wednesday. That's in order to resume production at the company's Fremont, California car plant. That's according to an internal correspondence that was shared with CNBC. Local health orders requiring Tesla to adhere to what they're calling, quote, minimum basic operations at that plant through May 3rd. Now, the county sheriff's office said that health orders there have not been relaxed. So this is where things are going to get complicated, and the orders will be reevaluated by May 3rd. So there's going to be some places where people are asking workers to come back to work where everything may not be exactly where people want them to be, and you can already see some of the friction that's beginning. When we return, a lot more on Squawk Box this morning.
Hold on.
Yes, Joe.
Becky was raising her hand. I know you've got a monitor. You can see that. And then I'm trying to talk. You love
I didn't see.
I didn't raise my hand, but Becky,
see her.
You got to watch the monitor.
But now I do, and usually I'll tell you I try as much as possible because
I know you spy on us.
To defer to her.
I know you spy. I know you watch us. That's why you got that thing down there. But What I was going to ask
you... I've got it now, too.
Joe,
yep.
I don't understand. This is the way you're supposed to run a professional TV show. That's why you do it.
Do what?
What were you going to say, Becky?
Oh,
I was just going to say, look, I think this gets back to the question of business liability. You know, all of these questions that have kind of circulated, it's been brought up to the White House. They've said they're considering this. If you start bringing employees back before those bans are lifted, how is the company not liable for anybody who gets sick under that environment? This is where it's going to get interesting as companies try to come back, as some states try to open up, and businesses try and figure out what that means for them.
So I'll tell you something terrible. You want to hear something terrible? I talked to a CEO this weekend, and we had this exact conversation about what happens if an employee gets sick in their place. This was actually a very responsible CEO who was not trying to bring people back. But he said that he had lots of conversations with CEOs who said, look, if people get sick, if lots of people get sick, nobody's going to really be able to figure out where they got sick from.
Yeah.
And that creates its own other conundrum. And so I think there are going to be executives, I hate to say this, out there who are willing to take the risk because the proof or the ability to actually bring that suit, unless you can prove that entire factory was somehow completely negligent, it's going to be hard, because you could say that you went to the supermarket and, went past somebody.
You're disappointed. If one person in a workplace get it, and then 200 people in the workplace get it.
Andrew, you're disappointed that they're not.
You're
disappointed they're not more liable. I mean, everybody's trying to work through this here, and obviously people are trying to get people back to work. You want to make sure that if something does happen, that guy's definitely in trouble if someone gets sick, and if you can't trace it exactly to the irresponsible CEO, then you're. I mean, we're all trying to get through. We're all trying to work this together. You could get it anywhere. You can get it in your car. I don't know. You get it. Hey, let me just. But we got to go. Let me just ask one more thing here.
Now we have to go
because I wanted to ask you. So I want to ask you, because this is unusual for the people that follow me on Twitter. They're telling me I need to watch a Michael Moore movie. You're talking about Tesla. Have you heard of this Michael Moore movie, and have you seen it? Do you have plans to see it? And why would my Twitter people want me to watch this movie?
I don't know what you're referring to.
Okay.
Which
it's
film?
It's about that all the renewable energy isn't, and this is Michael Moore, but it's dirty, or it can not do what it's intended to do in terms of cleaning up things. That's what the movie's about, and it's supposedly very good, but I don't know. This is from Michael Moore, though.
I don't know this. I don't know the film.
Now you'll probably get some stuff about it. You were talking to another CEO. Do you do anything but talk to important people on weekends, Andrew? Scientists and CEOs and small business owners and actually patients and everything else? It's amazing to me.
It's called reporting. It's my job.
I know, and you made a contrast. You said this was a responsible CEO, unlike all those other one of the.
Well, no, because what I was trying to juxtapose was say this CEO was not saying it himself. He was not saying, "Look, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna roll the dice, let everybody come back, and if they get sick, they get sick, and then I'll blame it on somebody else."
Okay.
He's saying he was talking to another CEO who was saying that exact thing, and I think sharing that actually with the public is important. And the reason it's important is because there are CEOs who are not going to be responsible about this, and there are CEOs who are going to bully their employees to come back to work before they have PPE, before they have social distancing, before they have all of the procedures and testing in place. And as long as the public understands that and knows that, that's the important part. That's my job, which is to tell the viewers what people are actually doing.
You're yelling again. I don't know where you keep those soapboxes, but are they right behind you, or are they all labeled? No, I understand that, but not all CEOs are going to bully people. Most people, Andrew, are trying to do the right things. And reopening a business, reopening the economy isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's people not like us and not like people on all our cable competitors that have these great jobs at home and are still getting paychecks, but there's people that aren't getting paychecks, that aren't able to put food on the table.
100%. I want people to get back to work.
Okay.
All I want to do is figure out a way to get people back to work and get people back to work safely, Joe.
All right.
We want to get people back to work safely. That's the important part of all of this. Okay. If that is not your main goal, then it's hard to understand what the sort of basic parameters are. It's safety first, then get people back to work. You could tell me, get back to work first. safety second, but that's a different issue. And then we can debate that.
It's a way you look at things, half full or half empty. I don't think everyone's out there trying to railroad their employees into getting back into terrible, unsafe conditions just for the almighty. I think everybody's trying to do the right thing and get the and there's a
Go talk to people in Georgia. The number of people, and we had one on our air on Friday, but you go talk to the number of restaurant owners and all sorts of people in Georgia, in Atlanta in particular, who feel that they are being bullied to go back to work. I'm just telling you that's the reality of the situation. I'm not saying it should be. I think everybody wants to get back to work, but figuring out how you do it is the important part. And we can talk for the rest of the next 3 hours about how you do it, because there's a lot of interesting proposals that have actually been developed and were disclosed over the weekend.
Like everything else, the entire this is all viewed from in a political spectrum. Not everybody thinks that
there's nothing political about this.
Not everybody thinks that the governor of Georgia. I have friends down in Georgia, and they were telling me, "Isn't our governor great? Isn't our governor great?" So not everything.
By the way, Colorado was run by
someone over the weekend, but he was just a friend. He wasn't an important CEO.
We can do this about Colorado. Right. Colorado is run by has a Democratic governor. Right. However, the numbers in Colorado were very different than the numbers in Georgia.
What's it got to do that he's a Democrat? You said it wasn't political. You just said that.
You just told me that we're looking at this through political lenses.
I'm just telling you, not everyone in Georgia thinks that this is just a horrible. There are people that actually want to do this, Andrew. Maybe not tattoo parlors, but there are,
No, there are.
I didn't know you could get a tattoo at a bowling alley. Apparently you can. All right, go ahead, Ed.
We got a lot more, as you might imagine, folks, on Squawk Box this morning. We're going to talk to Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who can maybe add some sanity to this conversation about the state's reopening for business this week and what it means and how to do it safely, folks. And as we head to a break, take a look at shares of Starbucks, that company partnering with venture capital firm Sequoia Capital China to co-invest in tech businesses in China. Starbucks said it's also going to look to form commercial partnerships with the next generation food and retail tech companies. Squawk returns in just a moment.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn. Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunningham to Fiala, he scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening. While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history.
There it goes, 3-2 pitches, hit in the air and hit well. Center field, Bader back, at the wall, it's gone!
Search Classic Game Replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime.
Ground ball out to Jackie Robinson, up with it, over to Reese for one, back to Hodges. It gets away from him, Barris trying to go to second.
It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on TuneIn.
You love listening to ESPN Radio live on TuneIn, but did you know you can also listen to favorite ESPN shows on demand? Get the latest takes from Stephen A. Smith,
dynamic duos all over the place,
Dan LeBatard, and Garlic and Wingo when it fits your schedule, and listen to episodes of Pardon the Interruption.
Pardon the interruption, but I'm Israel Gutierrez, and I love hosting the show. It's my humble...
Around the Horn and Highly Questionable as podcasts anytime you want. Search ESPN to see all the podcasts on TuneIn.
Hey, it's Jacoby here from Jalen and Jacoby, and after you watch The Last Dance on ESPN, which you're obviously going to do just like the rest of us stuck in our homes in quarantine, you can join Jalen Rose and I for Jalen and Jacoby, The After Show. And we will be joined by the director of the documentary series, Jason Eyre, to discuss each episode in detail. You can hear our After Show right here on ESPN Radio on Sunday nights after the episodes air, and they'll be available on the Jalen and Jacoby podcast feed.
Search Jalen and Jacoby to listen today.
EB. Crack Squawk Box this morning. Salons, retailers, and other businesses in several states beginning to reopen over the weekend. Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, South Carolina, and Alaska all began easing shutdown orders. Colorado, Mississippi, Minnesota, and Montana are set to begin reopening this week. Meantime, in Southern California, warmer weather combined with lockdown fatigue brought tens of thousands of people out to beaches. Despite stay-at-home orders, that's likely to continue as a heat wave in the upper 80s is coming to much of the area this week. I want to bring in former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who's also a Cnbc contributor, serves on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. In his latest op-ed piece over the weekend, he discusses why it's so important to win the race for a vaccine for the U.S. economy. Good morning to you. Doctor, it's great to talk to you. I want to talk about that vaccine in just a moment, but I want to talk about reopening for a second, because I did speak with a number of business leaders and also small business owners over the weekend who are actually in some of these states trying to make a go of it. And the real question I think that they keep asking is, can they make a go of it? Which is to say, it's one thing to say you're going to reopen. It's another thing to actually make your business work in a reopened world. So if you're in a restaurant business, a lot of the restaurant owners I'm talking to are saying the entire economic model actually doesn't work if we actually have to be social distanced. Meaning if we have to go 3 more months like this, where half the restaurant is going to have to be empty and we have all these additional costs on top of it, tell me I'm reopened, but I might as well not be. What do you tell those people?
Well, look, I think the question is the consumer going to come back? And I think the way to bring the consumer back into businesses, into stores, into restaurants, into hair salons is to give them confidence that there really isn't pervasive spread of this disease in the United States. And the reality is there is still pervasive spread of coronavirus across the entire nation. There's parts of the country, there's states where they never really had a significant outbreak, that they certainly meet the criteria to start reopening aspects of the economy. I count about 5 states that meet the criteria that the White House has set out in terms of sustained reductions in new cases. But for most parts of the country, they've plateaued, but they haven't really started to show sustained declines in new cases. Remember, we're still showing more than 30,000 new cases a day and still recording about 2,000 deaths a day. So while we've plateaued, there's evidence that we've plateaued, and New York is starting to come down very slowly. Across the nation, we're still very much in the throes of this epidemic. So I think we've got a couple of weeks to go until we start to see those sustained declines. And I think until we reach that point, consumers just aren't going to have confidence. You can reopen things, but I don't know that consumers really come back in the numbers that businesses are going to need.
Doctor, perhaps the single most forwarded article around the education world over the weekend was a piece by the head of Brown University on that university's plans to reopen in the fall and how they plan to do it. I just want to walk through it for you. I don't know if you know about it, because a lot of educators are saying if that's how we have to do it, I don't know how we're going to. He's talking about testing every single student, teacher, every single person who walks into the school on day one, and then doing it regularly. All of the students wearing masks, 2 classes, all big classes being done on Zoom rather than actually in class, social distancing in the town. So restaurants, bars, all of that obviously would be either closed or in a social distanced way. Taking over hotels in Providence so that you could use them as a quarantine infirmary of sorts, and effectively taking everybody's privacy away because everybody would have to be on an app. And the second that, and every time you're tested, you would go into a system. So it would be a closed system. And a lot of educators are looking at that saying, that's a very interesting model, but if that's the model, that may be hard to pull off around the country.
Well, look, we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. We're either going to have sustained spread of this virus and a smoldering infection, or we're not. And we have to wait and see. There's a real chance that come the fall, we have tools in place that we can mitigate small outbreaks and detect small outbreaks, and we're not facing a constant risk of this infection. Or there's a chance that we never really get rid of the infection. It smolders through the summer. When we come back in the fall, it sort of explodes into new large outbreaks and maybe even risks another epidemic. And if the latter scenario bears true, I'm not sure we're going to have residential college campuses. It's going to be a tough environment. If we can keep this virus at bay and try to control it and just have really small outbreaks and we're able to detect them very quickly, we'll be able to go on with our lives with, much less risk than we're facing right now. So we're going to have to see what happens. Remember, we may also have, to the other point you said at the outset, a vaccine in the fall that's, while not approved, is deployable in the setting of an outbreak. So our toolbox could be very different in the fall, and our risk profile could be very different.
Dr. Gottlieb, on that point, Mitch Daniels actually put out a letter to Purdue over the weekend, and Purdue alum, everybody who picked up on this, who said, look, they think it's going to be okay because most of their students are of the age that doesn't seem like there's a huge impact, but they're going to have to find ways to separate those people from others. And so I was thinking, you bring all the students back and then don't get them anywhere near the professors who are going to be older. But I want to talk to you about your piece in the Wall Street Journal today. This idea that we need to make sure we're building a vaccine, and it's happening here in America first. That's a huge issue, and I thought about this a little bit before. There are potential vaccines that maybe look like they are on the cusp of things in other countries, but what are the odds that we're going to be, where will we be in line in terms of receiving that vaccination? And I think that's your point with this, is we need to make sure we're working pretty hard right here.
Yeah, well, we don't need to be first. I think we need what we want in an ideal world is to have a vaccine simultaneously in many parts of the world. I think the reality is that the vaccines that come to the market are going to be invariably supply constrained. No one's going to come to market with a vaccine and have 1 billion doses of it. They'll maybe have 50 million, 100 million doses. And so as much as countries say that they're going to share those vaccines, they're going to prioritize inoculating their own populations. And in fact, in 2009 with H1N1, we had a vaccine that was destined for the United States being manufactured in a foreign country. It was a U.S. product that was manufactured in a foreign facility. And that country said, you know what, we're going to hold on to your doses and vaccinate our population before we ship you what you're owed. So this is what's going to probably happen in an environment if you have epidemics and outbreaks in the fall. And so we need to make sure that we have a supply here. We need to make sure that we have manufacturers stood up here. We can't just rely on China or even the Europeans to share vaccine with us before they supply their local population. If you look at what's going on in the world right now, there's 6 vaccines in clinical trials right now, 3 in early stage clinical trials, 3 in more advanced clinical trials. The 3 that are in advanced clinical trials are in China. They're entering phase 2, phase 3 studies. They may have a vaccine, they said, in early 2021 that's fully licensed and available for their population. So we risk being behind the curve on this and not having it available. And the point I made in the piece is that this is a public health achievement, but we also need to remember that the first country to have a vaccine and be able to mass inoculate the population is first to restore their economy as well. So it was really a wake-up call, hopefully, to policymakers to say this is really important and we need to put resources into it.
Hey, Doctor, you saw the WHO. It was kind of almost a controversy, and they actually changed some of their comments in their tweet. It was reported initially that definitively that your antibodies don't give you immunity long-term for the virus. Then the WHO changed, the WHO changed the language and said there's no evidence at this point that you get long-term immunity. Do you think this is a case where we need to hope for the best but prepare for the worst? Normally, the way the immune system works, and I know we have seasonal flu, but that's a different flu every year, but normally, if your immune system has seen something as specific as COVID-19, there would be immunity for a certain amount of time, right? Or do we just have no idea whether once you've had it that you don't get it again?
Well, that was a characteristically cautious and muddled statement by the WHO,
Right.
consistent with things they've been saying throughout this epidemic. I mean, there's no reason to believe that if you have this infection, you're not going to develop some level of immunity.
Right.
You will develop some level of immunity. Some people might not. There's variability, but if this behaves like every other virus and every other coronavirus, you're going to develop antibodies and they'll confer some level of immunity. Now, how long that immunity lasts, how strong it is, we don't know. It might not last that long in certain people. It might not be that strong so you can get reinfected but perhaps not get as sick. But most people are going to develop some level of immunity that's going to last some period of time. So I didn't understand that statement. It's inconsistent with everything we know about viruses. Now, it's fair to say if you have antibodies and you test yourself and you have antibodies, it's no guarantee you can't get it again. That's a reasonable statement, but you're going to have some level of immunity.
Dr. Gottlieb, there was an article in the Financial Times that you retweeted, caught my attention for sure. It suggested that the death rates could be 60% higher because of underreporting, particularly in some countries where they're not tracking it quite as closely.
Well, there's been an excess number of deaths in every country, including the United States. So if you look at mortality trends and you back out the known cases of coronavirus where people have succumbed to the infection and you look at overall mortality trends, you see an increase in mortality over baseline from this time period relative to other years. Some of that might be COVID that's not getting diagnosed, where people are succumbing to the infection at home or institutions where they're just not running diagnose people. Some of it is people who are dying in conditions where they're not presenting to the hospital. We know people having heart attacks and strokes and aren't coming into hospitals because they're afraid to get treatment in a hospital where there's a lot of COVID infections. So some of it is probably excess mortality as a result of the lockdowns. So it's hard to tease apart which is the contributing factor, but certainly some of it is coronavirus is not getting diagnosed.
Hey, doctor, we're losing you a little bit. I'm going to try to ask you one question. If it works, we'll do it. If it doesn't, we'll try to see you tomorrow. And the question is, Bill Ackman tweeted just last night, I believe it was last night, about a therapy using Pepsid, a test taking place using Pepsid that may have had some success, at least anecdotally. Do you know anything about it?
Well, there's a trial underway in New York at Northwell looking at Pepsid. This comes out of some experience in China where people were given high doses of it and showed some potential improvement. We're going to be able to turn over the card on that data pretty soon. These were people who were given high doses who are critical patients. I wouldn't recommend people use this on an outpatient basis, but there was some data that supported at least going forward with the clinical trial in this setting.
Right. And then the final question I had for you is another piece over the weekend from the New Yorker, juxtaposing the way Seattle and the state of Washington handled this versus New York and how the governor and the mayor in New York handled this. And really talking about how in Washington state, scientists led the process, and in New York, it was political. And I just wanted you to weigh in on that and whether you think that really is the reason that there is such a juxtaposition between those two states and what the ultimate outcome has turned out to be.
Well, look, I think New York was much more heavily seeded than the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, and we didn't know it at the time. And so in some respects, the California got lucky and New York got unlucky because of the scope of the seeding was in that state. New York was also slower to react. If you remember, the first city to react forcefully was the mayor of San Francisco.
All right,
Doctor, we want to thank you. It's always good.
I got it here, Andrew. I want to ask him just one more thing before we go to break, and we're going to break. But 2.9 million in the world, Doctor. What do you think the actual absolute minimum number is? Is it 10 million? Would you say, or give me a range, and then we got to go.
I think we're diagnosing 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 infections. So multiply the number of infections by 10.
Multiply by 10. So it's either 30 million to, well, who knows. Anyway, thank you. Coming up, oil prices tumbling again today. We're going to talk about the fallout, including the bankruptcy of a major offshore driller. Next, as we head to break, here's some of the images of the pandemic's impact from yesterday from across America. Coming back.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the Tunein podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
Did you know TuneIn doesn't just live here on your smart speaker? From the audio that moves you to the audio that gets you moving. Soundtrack your every movement with the free TuneIn app. Available on your phone or tablet. Download TuneIn from the App Store today.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Introducing a new podcast, ESPN Daily, hosted by me, Mina Kimes. When you want to go beyond your feed, when you want to get inside the score, when you want to get behind the highlight, there's ESPN Daily. Go deeper into the stories of the moment. Get the exclusive access and insider perspective that only ESPN can give you. The best sports story all day, 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week. ESPN Daily.
Search ESPN Daily to listen.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunnin to Fiala, he scores!
And For a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
To help make the most of your time at home, Tunein is sharing our top activities for social distancing. Tip number 4, relax. Don't feel like you have to be productive during these stressful days? This is the perfect time to focus on yourself. Whether that means meditating, taking a bath, sleeping in, or doing nothing at all, take a deep breath and treat yourself. For more indoor inspiration, search Listen from Home on TuneIn.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your 7th inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting 9 podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into
Time now for the Executive Edge. Let's start with the crash in oil prices. Down again this morning. It's tough to keep them up. There's, I guess, tankers all over the place. Offshore, all of them full. Today, a new casualty in the crash in crude. Diamond Offshore says it's filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company recently skipped an interest payment to bondholders, starting a 30-day clock to either pay up or default. Diamond blames the unprecedented impact from the oil price war. Becky.
Joe, thanks. Still to come this morning, we're going to get you ready for the biggest week of earnings season. That's next. In the meantime, the U.S. equity futures this morning are indicated pretty sharply higher. If you're watching, you'll see that the Dow futures are up by just over 200 points. S&P futures up by 25. The NASDAQ up by 94. If the Dow finishes in positive territory today, that would be 4 days in a row of gains, and that's the first time that would have happened since all the way back to February. Squawk Box will be right back.
Whenever you're unsure of what to play next, head to the homepage and discover something new. There you'll see custom recommendations based on your listening habits, along with new episodes of shows you've enjoyed in the past. Uncover your next audio obsession on the homepage. In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history. Search Classic Game Replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime. It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on
fast, easy to manage, and it actually works.
Having a company like CrowdStrike, knowing that we're protected, I don't need to be a cybersecurity expert.
CrowdStrike. We stop breaches. Try it free today.
That's a great idea.
She's the sweetest dog.
Where's the zipper?
Shark Tank, tonight starting at 8 Eastern. CNBC, get yours.
Get the latest breaking news alerts and listening suggestions for new stations and podcasts. Let TuneIn keep you in the loop with push notifications. Just go to your device's settings and allow push notifications from TuneIn to get live alerts and recommendations on the audio you want to know about.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen. With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Streaming today.
Good morning. U.S. equity futures indicated up this morning about 230 points or so on the Dow, 220. Right now it's bouncing around, even though Oil is down sharply, down almost 17%. You can see that on the little bug in the lower right. We're going to keep that up. Market faces a big test this week. 140 of the S&P 500 companies are scheduled to report, including the likes of Caterpillar, Amazon, Apple, McDonald's, and Microsoft. And many expect companies to continue withdrawing guidance, no doubt. Join us now, Anastasia Amoroso, Global Investment Strategist at J.P. Morgan Private Bank. And Anastasia, I guess that the reaction that the market has to these, you can't just say, well, the bad news is already out. No one's expecting anything good. It's going to be probably, you're going to look at these things and go, wow, that's really awful. But in your view, it's not going to be monolithic. There's going to be some numbers that don't look that bad versus some that just look abysmal. And the ones that don't look so bad, you might focus on those areas. Can you tell us which ones those are?
That's right. Exactly, Joe. I think on the broad market level, you're right. You're going to see more downside in terms of consensus earnings expectations. That's at least the history of the last week or so, is we've seen companies not beat as they typically beat. The average beat is actually a miss, and then only 65% of the companies are beating, and the typical average about 70. So because of that, for the broad market, we can see some downside in earnings expectations. But as you pointed out, there's definitely pockets of opportunity that you will have more companies than the average beat. And yes, I'm looking to tech and I'm looking to healthcare. They have been the winners year to date, and I say stick with those winners because these are the companies, these are the sectors that are delivering above average, above benchmarks earnings growth. And if anything, they've only been strengthened by the current environment. So to be fair, some of this is pretty consensus and some of these sectors are pretty well loved. But once again, if these are the companies that are able to grow earnings above the benchmark, and by the way, some of the future upside from new applications is not priced in, that's why we continue to like tech and healthcare.
So Anastasia, just tops down and macro viewpoint, not individual sectors. Do you believe the market looks out 9 months or so, the stock market? And if we're starting to see, some thawing in what's going on over in Europe, even in Italy, in different countries, in Spain, kids are going back out. So there's some reopening of economies around, and we're starting to see it slowly here in the United States. Do you think that the market needs another big leg down based on the earnings we see over the next 3 weeks?
I don't think it needs a big leg down. I am a little cautious on earnings, of course, but to your point, Joe, it is being offset by the reopening of the economy conversation. You're right, the market looks ahead, and in fact, we know that on average, the market troughs 3.5 months before the end of the recession. So if we think that the end of this recession is going to be by the end of June, because that's when we project that 80% of the states are actually going to open up, so it makes sense that we'll likely have seen the low for this particular crisis already. So we know that the economy is not going to snap back to 100% level of activity. We probably have to wait a year or two for that. But we know that earnings can actually have a V-shaped recovery from this year to the next. We've seen that, for example, during the global financial crisis, even though the GDP itself did not recover. So yes, I think markets lead the economy, and those sectors of tech and healthcare, I suspect, will lead the economy as well.
I mean, it's pretty unbelievable, Anastasia. And if you've done this a long time, maybe you're not surprised. But to look at what we're seeing, 16% unemployment, let's say, and a negative GDP number that we haven't seen since the Depression, and the stock market is 16% off its all-time highs. Now, that would normally, that would look to someone like there's a total disconnect, and we need to go, I don't know what the fair value would be, but that looks totally out of whack. Does it not?
I would say I would say there are a couple of reasons why it's not totally out of whack. And the first reason for that is, yes, you're right. There's a massive gap that has been left by the shutting down of the economies and the spike in unemployment rate. But that massive gap is being plugged in, is being offset by the monetary and fiscal policy. So if we look at the amount of loan guarantees and bond purchases and just paychecks, just checks going to companies and consumers, they go a long way to plug in this massive gap that has been left. So I think one of the reasons why we've seen the S&P multiple move materially higher since the March 23rd low is because it's pricing in a good degree of policy success. And I do think that's warranted. The other thing is the markets do look what's going to happen with the economy in the next quarter and the quarter after that and next year. And this is why it is so important for states to actually open up in May and June, because that's what consensus expects. Most GDP consensus estimates out there expect a second half recovery. So to the extent that we deliver, I think we're in good shape. But if this becomes a more prolonged reopening process, then we may be having some downside.
All right, Anastasia, we'll see. Thank you. We appreciate it. Andrew, only down 16%. With all, it's just amazing, isn't it? With all the carnage. I mean, you got to admit, how do you explain that?
It's remarkable. Well, we can talk about it. The more you look at it, but it's an unbalanced index for the most part, right? I think that's the thing to think about a little bit. Certain companies are really outperforming, and then there's this whole other group that's being left behind. They're being held up. I think the real question is, do the big guys that are holding it up, do they continue to hold it up if you have economic carnage on the other end? And I think that's sort of the big question, and I don't think anyone knows the answer yet, but we'll see. A lot more to come. Thank you, Joe. A lot more to come when we return. We're going to talk to Fanatics Executive Chairman Michael Rubin about the impact of the pandemic on retail. And a reminder, you can watch or listen to us live anytime on the CNBC app. We are right back after this.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the Tunein podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening. While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history. Search Classic Game Replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime. It's on demand, it's free, and it's only on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Wi-Fi connection spotty? Make sure you're never without something to listen to by offlining your podcasts on TuneIn. Just find your favorite podcast and tap the three dots to download the episodes you want to hear. When you're off the grid, you'll find all your offline audio under your favorites.
Hey, it's Jacoby here from Jalen Jacoby, and after you watch The Last Dance on ESPN, which you're obviously going to do just like the rest of us stuck in our homes in quarantine, you can join Jalen Rose and I for Jalen Jacoby, The After Show. And we will be joined by the director of the documentary series, Jason Eyre, to discuss each episode in detail. You can hear our After Show right here on ESPN Radio on Sunday nights after the episodes air, and they'll be available on the Jalen and Jacoby podcast feed.
Search Jalen and Jacoby to listen today.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Get your daily dose of NFL shop talk with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Start your morning off right with Around the NFL.
Injured, depleted roster into the playoffs, and I didn't think they belonged in the playoffs.
I think overall, though, it was a great divisional round weekend because you got the first one.
Run into the end zone with the Move the Sticks podcast.
We had a fun little Zoom cocktail hour last night.
Oh, yeah.
What a star-studded affair. Greg, you were there for the earlier part, but it really popped off a little later on. We had Zach Goldman.
And dive deep into the sidelines with the Peter.
Welcome back, everybody. The average price of gasoline fell by 9 cents in the last 2 weeks, according to the Lundberg survey. The national average is now $1.93. Gas prices are down about 80 cents per gallon since mid-October. Of course, crude oil prices have collapsed. You're not seeing that just yet at the pumps, though. When we come back, with sports on hold and millions of Americans out of work, we'll ask the head of Fanatics how sports apparel sales are holding up. That's next, right here on Squawk Box.
Did you know with TuneIn's local radio feature, you can stream live FM and AM stations in smooth streaming quality and discover local news, talk, and music stations you didn't even know existed. Navigate to the local radio section under Browse to listen locally on TuneIn. In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
You love listening to ESPN Radio live on TuneIn, but did you know you can also listen to favorite ESPN shows on demand? Get the latest takes from Stephen A. Smith,
dynamic duos all over the place,
Dan Lebatard, and Golic and Wingo when it fits your schedule. And listen to episodes of Pardon the Interruption.
Pardon the Interruption, I'm Israel Gutierrez, and I love hosting the show with my humble...
Around the Horn and Highly Questionable as podcasts anytime you want. Search ESPN to see all the podcasts on TuneIn.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the...
You'll get genuine medication delivered in discreet packaging. Roman, let's take care of it. Get started with your free online visit at getroman.com/TV.
The virus and the global economy. Oil prices under pressure, market volatility, and the latest on small business survival. Stay connected, stay informed. CNBC. Watch or listen live on the CNBC app.
Wi-Fi connection spotty? Make sure you're never without something to listen to by offlining your podcasts on TuneIn. Just find your favorite podcast and tap the 3 dots to download the episodes you want to hear. When you're off the grid, you'll find all your offline audio under your favorites. In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with the TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows.
Parker.com.
Welcome back, everybody. The coronavirus is reshaping retail, turning parts of the industry upside down. Some big brands have come under intense pressure. Shares of Macy's, Kohl's, and Bed Bath & Beyond all losing more than half of their value just since the start of March. Joining us right now to talk about the future of retail is someone who is very familiar with the industry, Michael Rubin, who's the executive chairman of Fanatics. And Michael, it's good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Becky.
You know, I think about retail and how you wind up in this. And on the one hand, you're in a very favorable position because you've got online retail, which is the one thing that is really taking off these days. On the other hand, sports have been canceled, and that is obviously the huge feeder to your business. So how have you seen an impact, and how has all this played out?
Yeah, well, generally, if you're in the sports business and you sell sports merchandise and there's not sports, it's not a great ingredient for successful business. Just be kind of cut right to the chase. I mean, if you look at our business, breaking it into two parts, 30% of our business is wholesale merchandise wholesale business to retailers like a Dick's Sporting Goods or a Kohl's or a Walmart. And then also we have, within that 30%, we operate about 50 different venues where you go to a stadium, we operate the stores there. That business is down nearly 100%. The 70% of our business that's e-commerce is actually holding up. It's respectable. The business it's decent. It's for not having sports, I guess glass half full, it's actually pretty decent. Glass half empty, we don't have sports, and that's what ultimately drives the business. So I said the e-commerce business, which is 70% of our revenue, is okay. The 30% of our business is non-existent.
Hey, Michael, a question for you. When, in fact, we do get to a place where some of your products are going to be sold on store shelves, how do you think that's going to change the business? Do you think people are going to go into stores and try clothes on? I mean, that's always been part of the thing, trying on the shirt to make sure the shirt fits. But if I know that somebody else has tried on the shirt before, it may change my view.
Yeah, I think that people talking about how much pain everyone's going through right now while all these businesses are closed, I think that's actually lessens the pain. The real pain is going to be beginning when people open back up and your restaurants are running down 30% in traffic and the average ticket's down another 30%. And so now the restaurant's running down 50%. When stores open back up and they're running down 50%. So I think that one thing that's definitely happened from this is a real share shift change. If e-commerce had been 20% of total retail, I think post-corona, post-vaccine, I bet it's still 30 or 35%. There's definitely a share shift up in e-commerce and a share shift down in physical retail. But between now and when a vaccine actually happens, I think retail and kind of restaurants and travel, all these industries are going to be, I think, brutal overall. And the big thing to think about is you've got all the costs associated with the business, except for you don't have the gross margin dollars that come from the pre-corona business.
And Michael, that raises the question, what kind of collateral damage is done in the meantime? It's not as simple as just turning the lights back on if this continues for an extended period of time.
Well, I'd say if this was over today and all the lights were turned back on, business is going to be brutal for retail. I mean, I don't think you can underestimate that someone opens back up and they still have their rents, they still have their labor costs, they still have the costs associated with business, but they're not going to have the volume that was there. If I had to give you a guess, I bet you when retail opens back up over the next few months, I bet you that restaurants run down 40%, maybe 50%. I think retail runs down 30% through the balance of this year and headed into next year until you get into a point where people become, until either Corona's cured or just America's sentiment changes.
6.65 million people filed jobless claims last week. Boeing will offer voluntary buyouts to its entire staff of 161,000. The move will preserve much-needed cash at Boeing, which is facing a sharp contraction in demand.